open session. Can I remind members that this meeting will be recorded and ask members to note that mobile phones should be switched off as they interfere with the recording. Tablet devices should be switched to mute, which is FM and F8 on your device. Can I remind members to declare their interests as appropriate throughout the meeting? Can I also remind members to keep their questions short and concise, with one question and appropriate supplementary per member. We will go round again for further questions as time allows. That, of course, doesn't apply to the reservoirs bill, obviously, when we're trying to scrutinise the bill. Declare the meeting open to the public then. Agenda item number 1 is apologies. Do we have any apologies? No apologies. Okay. Agenda item number 2 is chairperson's business. Can I advise members that Michelle McLaveen and myself and then Joanne Dobson was able to make the tail end of that meeting, met with the Fishermen's Forum yesterday. A note of that meeting is attached. The Forum have had great difficulties getting a meeting with the Minister, and can I suggest that we write to the Minister asking her to meet with the Forum immediately? Michelle, do you want to add into that?
Yeah, no, certainly agree with that line, Chair. There was a frustration, obviously, from the Forum yesterday with regards to the meeting, and I think, you know, if the Minister is unable to meet with them for some particular reason, that she does give an explanation of that as well. But I understand that the Forum are going to send us through additional information as well. But rather than wait for that, I think it would be incumbent of us then, just on the back of that meeting, then just to ask for a meeting ASAP.
Okay, Joanne, you want to?
Chair, I would support Michelle in that comment. The frustrations were there yesterday, and I think it would be remiss of us as the committee not to push for that meeting as a matter of urgency. Frustrations, they really were at their wits' end. So, just want to support Michelle. I think we should ask for that as a matter of urgency.
Chairman, I want to apologise for not attending that meeting. I overlooked it, but I would support the letter to the Minister.
Okay, any other members want to comment? As Michelle has said, we are waiting for them to respond in bullet point form.
I also apologise for not being able to attend the meeting yesterday. There was a number of our commitments.
Okay, that's no problem. Can I also advise members that I will be visiting a reservoir in Randallstown belonging to Robert and Dorothy Wilson on the 30th of April. That's tomorrow. The Assembly Communications team will be covering the visit to place on the committee website. If any other member wishes to attend, could they please let the clerk know by close of play today? Robert and Dorothy Wilson were both at our stakeholder event and were very vocal at that, so I committed to go out and viewing the reservoir. I thought it would help with regards to scrutiny of the bill itself. Can I also ask members to note that a tick sheet regarding the Dard breakfast at the 2014 Balmoral show was circulating. If you could please complete that before the end of the meeting today, it would help. It would help the Balmoral show and Dard with their breakfast arrangements. Okay, members. Thank you. Agenda item number 3 then is minutes of the meeting on the 8th of April 2014. Can I refer members to the draft minutes? Pages 6 to 13. Are members content that the draft minutes are accurate? If so, I will sign. Agreed. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item number 4 is matters arising. Can I refer to the matters arising at pages 15 to page 45? Are members content to action matters arising as suggested in the index sheet at pages 15? Can I just add that if you look at point 4, which I think is on page 25, a letter dated from the department, dated the 17th of April, talked about Dard's corporate plan and the further recommendations and targets that they are placing within that plan. Can I just say, well, first of all, we commend the department for listening to the views of the committee with regards adding to that corporate plan in light of the meeting they had and the engagement they had with us. Commend the committee for the questions that they asked, and again, I think that should be a lesson to the committee that yes, when we do structure our questions and allocate questions and have targeted questions, we can be very effective as a committee and as a team when scrutinising the department on issues like corporate plans and annual plans. But with regards to the nitty-gritty of the detail of the plans, there are a couple that concern me. I think there's 4 additional targets. One on the Lochs Agency, the angling regulations by 31st of December, which is fine, there's a date there. Also establish a fisheries task force by June 2014 to examine the challenges facing the offshore fishing fleet. And again, that came from questions that Michelle had asked. But the other 2 then is the one about the Portray letter. And again, it's not a smart target in the fact that there's no dates, no quantum, no nothing. It's basically just an aspiration. They see it as an important issue, and their aim is to assist the poultry industry in finding a long-term sustainable and viable option for utilisation of poultry litter. There's nothing there to really measure them against or aim for. And then the 4th one, which is remote sensing, the additional business plan target 5.2 has been added as follows. Complete at least 500 claims for single farm payment in December 2014 that have been subject to remote sensing inspection. Well, I would like to know where they got the 500 figure from. Where have they plucked it from? Why have they went for 500? How many remote sensing inspections are they going to complete this year? And how does that then equate with this figure of 500? And if we could ask the department to forward that information as quickly as possible. I think on the looking at it, 500 single farm payments completed by December is too little and not that ambitious, considering the amount of trouble the department got themselves in with remote sensing this year. Any other comments, members, on this or any other?
Chairman, just on this issue of the poultry litter, we were told that there was efforts being made to have discussion with the departments in relation to bringing forward a proposal. There seems to be a lack of urgency about that, and I have an open question. Many poultry farmers tell me that other farmers are very willing to purchase from them poultry waste to use as substitute fertiliser. And I think that's a real game that's going on. And I think there's no urgency because it is almost an unofficial trade in poultry litter. Thanks, Chairman.
I know there have been moves made in the Balmain area for one, where there's an application in for that competition. I know of others then in the region. But again, Joe, do you want to maybe ask questions around that, just
Yes.
for an update?
Yes.
See where we are on the whole the competition with regards to 2 departments. Any other questions around matters arising, or are members content? Sorry, Joe.
A couple of points, if I may. First of all, number 7, Red Cap Securities proposal. I welcome the fact that the PSNI have met with Mr Brown from Red Cap to discuss their proposal and see if listed members may raise these issues with the PSNI briefing the 27th of May. Could I just suggest that we forward the letter to Mr Brown for his consideration and perhaps make the Justice Department aware of this initiative?
Okay, no problem. Yeah, and other points?
Yes, number 9, the Minister's response to the Ulster UFU concerns re the beef sector.
Yeah.
Firstly, declaring interest. My husband is a beef farmer. I certainly welcome the recognition from the Minister that she feels, in her words, that farmers are being penalised unfairly by this plans, but it would be helpful to know what she plans to do about it, other than, as it says in the letter, to urge processors to think again. That's not a lot of help, in my opinion. We do have a strong world leader with the beef sector, and I know there is very, very real concerns out there amongst farmers on how these changes would impact on their businesses. So I think we need to get more proactive rather than urge processors to think again. I don't think we're going to get very far just with that approach.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just on that, and just to equate, obviously the same issues are happening in our regions and our countries, but I do note that down in the Republic of Ireland, Minister Coveney hosted a forum whereby he invited all the beef processors, the farm organisations to a meeting to try and resolve the issue. And I'm wondering, with regards to a letter going to the Minister, that we could maybe ask her to look at something similar to bring everybody together and to try and get the issue resolved.
I support that, sir.
Members be in agreement?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would also support that. There is concern absolutely out there within the beef sector. And the difficulty is that the processors seem to be a law unto themselves. And I think they almost need to be embarrassed into taking the proper approach.
Okay, just for people's members' attention too, there are correspondence later on dealing with that issue, plus there'll be more coming next week from the supermarkets, so just so you're aware. Okay, so members are happy and content to note or to act as suggested. Okay, moving on then. Agenda item number 5, update on implementation of CAP in the UK and Ireland. Oral briefing from Reyes. Can I ask members to note that due to unforeseen family circumstances, Mark Allen will not be available to present this paper today. Can I suggest that if members have any particular queries on the paper, they have a quiet word with the clerk at the end of this meeting or at any time during the week? Members content? Okay. Agenda item number 6 then is technical decisions on CAP Pillar 1, an oral briefing from DARD. Can I refer members to the covering note from the clerk at pages 80 and papers from the department at 82. Can I welcome to the committee Norman Fulton, Grade 5, Chief Agricultural Economist, Rosemary Mew, Grade 7, Principal Officer, and Mark McLean, Grade 7, Principal Agricultural Economist. You're very welcome to the committee, as always. Okay. I do note that you've been very busy travelling around the country, going to meetings, especially you, Norman, and I've come across you a couple of times. So I know you are very, very busy, and this is a very, very busy period for you within your particular section of the department. Members will have already had the chance to read your briefing paper, so can I ask you to take up to 10 minutes, if possible, to address the committee. As you will no doubt be prepared for, the discussion will probably range wider than the technical decisions taken by the Minister on CAP, but I have no doubt you'll be able to cope with the questions, Norman, that we would pose to you with your team alongside you. Can I also ask members then to keep their questions concise and to the point? So without further ado, Norman.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. If I just very quickly go through the main decisions that have been announced so far, and then leave plenty of time for questions. There's been really two sets of decisions announced so far. First, on the 14th of March, around entitlements. First of all, all existing entitlements, single farm payment entitlements, to be cancelled at the end of this year, and new entitlements allocated in 2015, really to restart the system, and provides the opportunity for landlords, non-farming landowners, to exit the system at that point in time. Entitlements held in 2014 will form the basis of the calculation of initial value of unit value of entitlements going forward. And the option to restrict the number of entitlements to the area of land declared in 2013 will not be used. So those were 3 important decisions that were announced back in 14th of March, really to facilitate decisions and by landowners and farmers around the whole trading of entitlements this year. Then the second batch of technical decisions then announced on the 9th of April. First of all, relating to eligible land, clarifying the position with regard to heather, making it absolutely clear that that is an eligible land use. Decisions not to apply reduction coefficients for the purpose of either establishing or activating entitlements. And making clear that areas under permanent greenhouses would be eligible for the purposes of establishing entitlements. Minimum claim size and for both the establishment of entitlements and subsequent claims set at 3 hectares. No siphon on the transfer of entitlements without land. Important decision then around those who have never held single farm payment entitlements, but who can be brought into the new regime if they can show that they were actively involved in production activity in 2013. So I think that's an important decision there. Regional reserve, we will have to make provision for new entrants and young farmers under the regional reserve, but also decision to make provision for cases of force majeure or exceptional circumstances from the reserve. A series of decisions around greening. First of all, not to use the equivalence option around greening, but stick with the provisions that are set out in the EU regulation. Monitor permanent grassland at a regional level. Again, an important decision. It removes a lot of potential bureaucracy and restrictions for individual farmers and for the department. And we think that it doesn't create any significant issues for us, given the very stable nature of our permanent grassland within Northern Ireland. A decision at this point not to extend the ploughing or conversion ban beyond areas designated under the Birds and Habitats Directive, but keeping that under review so that should we have an emerging problem, we always have the option of re-looking, re-examining that option. A series of decisions around ecological focus areas. We will use the conversion matrix that is available to us for the purposes of calculating areas of ecological focus area, and that's an important simplification. Decisions around the eligible features and areas that would count towards EFA. The most significant one for Northern Ireland will be landscape features, and particularly hedgerows and field boundaries, which in many cases will be sufficient to meet the EFA requirements for those farmers who have such an obligation. And then finally, decision not to use the redistributive payment, not to use the small farmers scheme, and finally on the active farmer test, not to extend the negative list of non-agricultural businesses beyond the mandatory list that exists within the regulation, and not to extend tests that would be available to us under the regulation as well around this issue. So very, very quickly, that's the main decisions that have been taken so far, and very happy to take questions on that or on other issues that
You must be reading my mind, Norman. I don't know. Thank you very much for your presentation and your concise and keeping within the time. I appreciate that. Again, thank you very much. Some of these decisions have been made already. Some of them are very welcome. Some of them are common sense. Some of them certainly the farming community have been crying out for some sort of assurance and awareness on them, so they can move forward. But obviously, and you'll know this yourself out there in the wider public and the farming community, when we do attend meetings, a state of uncertainty is still rife there. And they can't find it very, very hard, even in dealing with entitlements to that point, as to what agriculture will look like this time next year even, and moving on forward in the years of the programme. Can you explain to us what your role is now, Norman, having already made these decisions in if you like, a drip feed fashion, albeit welcome? What is the process for you now? Because I know that I've asked you at public meetings, when will the Minister take her proposals in their entirety to the Executive for them to assess, and then for the Executive to make decisions so that the farming community will know exactly what they face? So can you explain to us what the process is from here on in for you?
Sure, yep.
When do you recommend to the Minister, when does the Minister take it to Executive, and when do you see decisions being made?
Okay, well, certainly, we've got an awful lot of decisions to be taken on CAP reform, and we have been trying to move forward and to feed out some of those decisions and move forward on that basis. In terms of the remaining batch of the major decisions that now exist to be taken, we have collated our policy analysis, taking on board the views of stakeholders, and we have made our submission to the Minister on those remaining issues. And so that policy document is now with the Minister, and so effectively it has entered the political process at this stage. I think the Minister made reference to that yesterday at oral questions. So from here on in, obviously we will still be there to support the Minister in terms of policy advice going through that process. But it now essentially is within that sort of political sphere, and it will move forward within that. Clearly, we need to have a set of decisions. Absolute deadline for that in terms of making notifications is the 1st of August. As the Minister indicated yesterday, obviously if we can get decisions in advance of that, that would be very welcome for the department, very welcome for farmers. But we have that I suppose, absolute deadline that we need to be very mindful of as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, you're right. The Minister did mention it yesterday at question times. That worried me because I do believe that these decisions should have been made by now, and I do believe that we can't look at that as a deadline. We have to have the work done beforehand. No doubt you'll have been speaking and advising the Minister for months now on these issues. Have you advised her with the submission to be handed to the Minister? Was there a time deadline on that to advise the Minister when she should go to the Executive?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not really our place to do that. I mean, we advise, make the Minister aware of, well, first of all, what our analysis and recommendations are. But really, and the Minister is very well aware of the ultimate deadline that exists within that. But really, now it's for the Minister now to take that forward within the political process and to the Executive. These are very important decisions. This is a very significant sum of European funding that will come into Northern Ireland over the next number of years, up to £2 billion thereabouts. Clearly, it's right that the Executive take a decision on these matters, and it's very significant for the industry as a whole. I think it's correct that time is taken to make sure that the decisions are well founded, well based, and reflect the overall, I suppose, balance of interests that exist within Northern Ireland. With this reform, with this major redistribution of support that will come out, that is absolutely inevitable. There will be a major redistribution of support. We're not going to have a set of decisions that will please everyone, and therefore it is trying to take a set of decisions that are right for the industry as a whole. And fair for the industry as a whole, and it is a difficult set of decisions.
Okay, thank you. Joanne Dobson.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Norman, thank you for your briefing, and the Minister's clarification on the technical issues have helped clear up some of them, certainly, but however, as the Chair has alluded to, major decisions are still undecided. Can I focus on, again, young farmers? And what do you envisage the uptake for support for young farmers and new entrants to be? And what is the likely impact on the basic payment scheme, which would be required to fund the regional reserve? And also, I suppose I'll give you them all at once. What is the Department's current position to a suggestion on the consultation of a Level 3 qualification for eligibility for the Young Farmers Scheme? I know the Minister has confirmed to me that she is reviewing this. Could you provide us an update on that?
Okay, first of all, in terms of the uptake under the Young Farmers Scheme itself, it was always very difficult to predict that. What we do know is that there's an absolute budgetary limit of 2% for that particular scheme. So no matter how many individuals come into that particular mechanism, it's limited to 2% of the budget. So I suppose it's one of those things we'll just have to wait and see how many come forward. It really is virtually impossible to predict the numbers who will come forward. On the regional reserve, initially the regional reserve can be set at up to 3%. But if more is required to meet the demand for allocations to young farmers and new entrants, then there is provision to actually increase that level above 3%. Obviously, this is all working within a single pot. So if any part of the pot is increased, then the remaining amount that will go towards the basic payment scheme is reduced accordingly. It is a zero-sum game. In terms of the overall the level 3 qualification issue, we put that suggestion out there as part of our consultation. I think the overall response to the consultation, whilst there were concerns about level 3 and whether that might be too high, I think there was broad acceptance of the principle of trying to encourage and reward those who have actually gone to the effort of investing in their skills. It's the right message to send. It gives that encouragement. And it's not just a case of going through a hoop for the purposes of getting access to support. It's actually something that will be a benefit to the business in the longer term. So I think it's certainly the principle is right, and so there were concerns around the level 3, and that's now with the Minister for her consideration.
I know from my personal experience, my son is superb at handling animals and working on the farm, but he couldn't have gained level 3, so that would automatically have, ruled him out. So I do think there certainly needs to be, and that he's not the only one. From what I'm hearing, the bar is set very, very high for that. And we certainly don't want to discourage. So
sure,
I wait with interest to see the outcome of that, because she did say she would review it, but I think it's vital that it is reviewed. We cannot just eliminate some of our young farmers because they're not capable of they're not up to level, and they're excellent young farmers.
I think that's
his
absolutely.
skills at cattle handling and everything, and bookwork and everything is superb, but yet he wouldn't have attained that level.
Sure.
Can I ask a supplementary,
Yeah,
Chair, then? Just are you concerned, Norman, of the criticism from some that the consultation questions from the Department on the CAP implementation were vague at best, and these obviously would impact on the answers received? The reason I'm asking is this particular issue has been raised with me by so many young farmers that they deserve to receive additional support to establish and remain in the industry. And also on the issue that I have raised in this committee many times, would also help to retain the young farmers. Can you give us an assessment on the possibility of a capital grant scheme being brought forward by the department along the same lines as Scotland? Because that's everywhere I go, I'm asked that again and again and again. Where's encouragement? Where's the scheme, the party with Scotland to keep them in the industry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of the questions within the consultation document, what we tried to do within that document actually was to try and focus as much as possible by actually making suggestions. There was two ways we could have gone with this. We could have left it very open and simply said, here is the policy framework. What do you think? And I think that wouldn't that wouldn't have really given us an awful lot. But by actually making suggestions and saying, we suggest we do this, it actually served to focus the responses around those suggestions, and I think give us a much more usable response from our consultation than would otherwise have been the case. So I think that's the line you try to tread, I suppose, in a consultation. You don't want to close off possibilities, but at the same time you want to provide some direction and focus that you actually get a usable response from stakeholders to the consultation. So it is trying to tread that line, and I think we did get a good response to that consultation. I think it was the right thing to do. I think a lot of stakeholders appreciated that approach to actually try and set out if you like, a suggested or a recommended framework that we would apply, and it did serve its purpose. In terms of capital grant scheme, obviously that's a Pillar 2 issue, not directly involved in that, although Rosemary has been involved on the looking at specific issues around young farmers. We did have our own new entrance scheme that we did operate it as a nationally funded state aid for a number of years. That provided us, I think, with a useful evidence base in terms of looking then forward in terms of what such a scheme could do. I think the conclusion that we came to, and we put that as part of a consultation on the Pillar 2 last year, was that it perhaps is, it's not as effective as you might think. It creates a lot of bureaucracy, and what you probably find on holdings that are coming forward for significant support for capital grant is that they will tend to have succession issues already addressed within the business, or they have successors coming along within the business.
And they do so much more for the young farmers if they had the capital grant in place, surely.
Yeah, and the consultation on Pillar 2 looked at a tiered approach to capital grants, and so you were actually looking at some quite high levels of capital grant being available compared with the current programme, which was under the farm modernisation, was actually quite small level of capital grant, but really looking to use a capital grant scheme to actually develop a business. And therefore, in return for access to significant capital to support the business, there needed to be a clear development pathway for that business, based on a business plan, etc., to actually move the business along. So taking that much more business focus around the whole issue. And I think that's something that ties in very well with somebody, a young person on the farm. They have that longer term perspective.
You can understand the frustrations, Norman. They have the business plan, they know where they want to take their business, they just don't have the funding. They look at Scotland and they see the support that the young farmers are getting there, and it's something that I'm asked constantly anywhere I go, why do we not have it here when we have it in Scotland? And we could do so much more with growing the business if they had that. That scheme.
Sure. And that's something that's really been considered in within the new programme, but also the fact that you will have additional support for young farmers under Pillar 1. It's an additional injection of support into the business that does help in those formative years where the young person is taking over the reins of the business. So for the first 5 years as head of holding, they could qualify for this additional level of support. So a very important time to get them established within the business, and that will be available under Pillar 1.
Just finally,
I'll come round again, Joanne.
Well, it's the same point.
Yeah, I'll come round again because good stab at it. Declan McAleer.
Thank you, Chair. Do you see in relation to the decision to extend the single farm payment to people who don't hold entitlements but who present a verifiable proof that they've engaged in agricultural activity on or before 30th of May 2013, would you be able to give a wee bit more clarification as to what would be the nature of that verifiable evidence that they require?
Well, I think for the most part we should be able to drive that from our own records. Because if most businesses, farm businesses in Northern Ireland have livestock.
Yeah.
So if we know that the business exists, that there was an active herd within that business, and there was animals on the holding, I think that's pretty clear evidence of agricultural activity. And so that's something that can be driven largely from within our own administrative systems. So you already have that evidence available to you. There may be instances of businesses, for example, they may be involved simply in potato production, for example, or cropping. And we may not have a direct link into having that type of evidence. But I think for those individuals, if they're genuine farmers, they have been involved in production in 2013, it should not be a significant difficulty to be able to present an evidence of what they've been doing. They will have had purchase of fertilisers and inputs. They'll have sales of cereals or potatoes or horticulture or whatever. So they will have all of the evidence that they would need to show that they're actually involved in production in that year. So I don't see it as being an insurmountable hurdle for those individuals to prove that they were involved in production.
And just really supplementary to that there, do you see, you made reference that the value of your entitlements held in 2013 will inform the value of your entitlements in 2014. Now, the word in 2015, sorry,
yeah.
The word inform, could you just elaborate on how definitive it will be the case that the actual value will be rolled over to 2015, or how that be calculated? And just one more wee thing related to that as well. See, if you take farmers who aren't active this year and aren't actively engaged in production and agricultural activity for some unforeseen reason, perhaps medical or whatever, but in 2016, 2017 or in the future, they may well be in a position to engage actively in agricultural production. Will they be eligible to apply for entitlements at a later stage, or is 2015 like a very definitive cut-off year?
Okay. In terms of the first issue, entitlements held in 2014, we recognise that many farmers hold more entitlements than they would currently claim. They would always have slightly more, and that's, I suppose, back to an historic issue that back in 2005 they may have been entering land that was not strictly eligible, and so many farmers will have slightly more entitlements than they will actually be claiming. So by using entitlements held, it allows them to recycle or keep the value of those entitlements alive as we move into the new regime. So effectively the process will be farmers coming out of 2014 will hold a pot of support. So it's not we're not so much interested in the number of entitlements they have, but it's the total value of those entitlements. That is initially rolled forward into 2015 and will be spread across the area of land declared in 2015 to create the number of new entitlements that they will be allocated and set their unit value.
Yeah.
And then you start in that year, the first year of progression towards flat rate at whatever pace is decided upon for that progression towards flat rate. So that's the mechanism as such. Now, obviously, if we were to go flat rate immediately in 2015, then really that becomes irrelevant. Yeah. But that effectively is the mechanism. On the issue of farmers, really, 2015 is the year in which your entitlements are established, and that's the key year that sets everything up for moving forward. Beyond 2015, the only entitlements that would be allocated would be in the case of new entrants or young farmers out of the regional reserve. And so that's the only mechanism that we would have beyond 2015 to allocate new entitlements. It really, I suppose, really depends on this. If certain people fall into that definition of new entrant or young farmer beyond 2015, then they would be able to come to the reserve and make an application from the reserve. Yes, there's also the provision for force majeure or exceptional circumstances. I think that probably would apply primarily in 2015. I mean, it's difficult to envisage that there would be circumstances that would extend beyond 2015. So it's really what exceptional circumstances, force majeure, prevented an application being lodged in 2015. I can't really see it then that's going to extend beyond that year, given that 2015 is the year in which the system is established.
Thanks, Norman. Thank you, Chair.
Can you elaborate just on what exceptional means? What are the things that could come up?
Yeah, I suppose it's difficult. If you had a situation, for example, some sort of catastrophic event that somebody didn't have land available to them, or possibly some sort of major health crisis, for example, I think each case would have to be examined on its own merits. So you can't really give sort of guidance as such at this stage. It really is to deal with the exceptional circumstance. So it's one of those things, you'll know an exceptional circumstance
It'll be tested at the time.
Yeah, effectively.
Definition.
Yeah. Well, yes, yeah. I suppose, yes, we have some issues here. Exceptional circumstances, force majeure, things like a severe natural disaster gravely affecting the holding, accidental destruction of livestock buildings on the holding, episodic or plant disease affecting part or all of this livestock or crops. So there's a range of issues. Probably that's sort of those issues more relevant to coupled support, for example. So things like that.
Okay, William Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you're very welcome. It's been covered somewhat by previous questioner. In relation, in my area, I had a number of, quite a few orchard apple growers. A number of those never received single farm payments, and of course they were very active. And they were told, well, not by yourselves, but told by many, there's no other way of getting in without other than buy entitlements, purchase entitlements. Now we're told by yourselves that there is a possibility, and you do accept that you will provide entitlements if they can prove that they're active on May 13. When's the deadline for them applying for that? And have they to make an application before the 15th of May?
In terms of orchards, I think they were brought in under the health check in 2008. For 2005, they were not part of the regime, but the 2008 health check actually allowed the orchards to come in, and at that stage, a decision was taken to allocate the basic valued entitlements on those areas, €78 per hectare. Orchards will continue to be an eligible land use moving forward into the new regime. So really,
For those that didn't receive entitlements or did not act on the 2008, those that are active but did not receive entitlements or not see, or never claimed single farm payment.
Yeah, well, they could come in then on the 2013 involved in active production, and that would get them through.
And when is that? Is there a deadline for application for that, for instance?
Well, they would apply into the regime then in 2015.
In 2015.
Yeah, but if they have never claimed single farm payment before, but they have eligible land, which includes orchards, they're involved in that production in 2013. That then gets them through to join the regime then in 2015.
That's okay.
Okay, Robin Swan.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your presentation so far. It was the Minister's answer to me, I think, yesterday. She talked about there's a political process and a process of government now to go through. And in the previous question time to that was OFM, DFM, where the First Minister said his SPADs were talking to the Deputy First Minister's SPADs. In that political process we're in now, is the Minister of Agriculture still in control, or is it into a bigger political sphere?
I mean, really, you're asking me a question that I simply am not in a position to answer. I mean, it is within the political sphere. At this point in time, there's a political process. It will come to the executive for decision. I'm afraid I'm not in a position. I'm not privy to those discussions.
Have you an idea when it's due from the executive?
No.
So for policy advice to date, you have put forward your paper as far as you're concerned, and then it's hands up.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, Joe Byrne.
Thanks, Chairman. I welcome the presentation by the three officials. I feel I can empathise, with them. They're in the same club, a verbal attack by Harry Club. But, Chairman, in relation to entitlements, I think this is the vexed issue about the current level of entitlements are largely determined by the residual relic of 2005. And I think maybe a fuller explanation about how that fits the bill at the moment is the issue that some farmers that have gone to farming since 2005 feel very aggrieved that they've not been able to avail of what they regard as due treatment and fair treatment. If whatever we agree, are we going to reach the stage of a level playing field in terms of entitlements? Thanks, John.
Yeah, I suppose this has always been the big issue around decoupled support. I mean, we had this back in 2005, and we run up to 2005 and the model that we deployed at that stage. And I suppose moving forward, it's really around this issue of what's a fair distribution of decoupled support, given that decoupled support is not linked to production. It doesn't have that purpose. It is there as an income support, and that's its primary purpose. So what's the best way of distributing that support? And I suppose the issue that we face at this point in time, redistributing that support. I suppose a clear direction that is being set within Europe is that we are moving towards flatter rate support. We have a certain minimum level that we must achieve by 2019, and that has been set out within the overall agreement. We can certainly move faster than that. Some regions have decided to move considerably faster than that. For example, in England, they already are operating a flat rate regime. So each region has taken decisions. We are certainly on a pathway towards levelling out support. I suppose the big question is that we face at this point in time is the pace of transition. How fast do we move along that pathway towards transition? And I think that's probably the most significant issue within the reform at this point in time. How fast do we move along that pathway, given the competing positions and needs of individual farmers within that? Certainly some farmers would like to move faster. Those who have a lower than average level of support per hectare would like to see faster progression. That's a natural expectation. But similarly, there are half active farmers are above the regional average. And for them, it will be a difficult adjustment to their business moving forward. They need to have time, appropriate time, to adjust their business to the challenge of dealing with less support. So it really is a matter of judgment as to what's the most appropriate pace of transition that steers a pathway between those competing interests, but at the same time always progressing towards flat rate.
Chairman, just a supplementary on that. Am I right in saying, Norman, one of the anomalies is that the current entitlements are based on what was coupled payments prior to 2005? So in other words, there was a connection between the active production and the active land use at the particular time of 2005. A particular farmer could have bucked up X plus Y entitlements, X being his own land plus Y being Con Acre, and he still has enjoyed the benefits of that enlarged entitlement, even though he may be farming less at the moment.
Yeah, that's certainly correct. I mean, the system that was established in 2005 within Northern Ireland largely linked back to claims activity during the reference period 2000-2002, plus the level of milk quota held 31st of March 2005. Those are the key aspects. We had a hybrid system within Northern Ireland where we also had an area-based component within our system, €78 per hectare. The reason for having that system was to try and correct what we identified as a problem within the beef sector, whereby producers of calves were selling those animals clean-eared, for example, or maybe a single punch animal, to someone else further down the marketing chain who would claim the support. But the value of that and the fact that that animal was eligible for support was reflected in its market value, which fed back to the seller of the calf. With decoupling of support, that chain would have been broken, and therefore you would have had effectively a windfall gain for the beef finishers, and a significant loss of revenue for the calf producers, suckler producers, but dairying as well. And so therefore that area-based component was designed to try and offset that effect and to deliver an outcome that better reflected the distribution of support both directly and indirectly under the old coupled regime. Now, we always recognised in 2005 that was seen as the fairest distribution in 2005, but we recognised that over time that would be seen to become increasingly unfair. I suppose that's, that's why at a European level that same situation exists, and therefore the move towards flat rate over an appropriate period has been required to actually start to address that issue.
Yeah, I think I would just also add that it's not necessarily the case that those who have the highest value of entitlements per hectare necessarily have the highest income per farm. Because if you take the SDA beef sector, it has a value of entitlements per hectare about twice the SDA sheep sector, yet the income figures would show that the SDA beef sector has a lower income than the SDA sheep sector. But I think this issue about whether you have a historic payment or a flat rate payment and how much of each is really, the further you move away from the historic base of 2002, the more difficult it becomes to justify that link back. There's a judgment call in terms of when's it no longer justifiable, but you can certainly, if you get to 2020, it's less justifiable than in 2005. If you get to 2030, it's even less justifiable again.
And lastly, Chairman, just one issue for clarification. The siphon.
Yes.
Has a final decision been taken that there will be no siphon? No.
That was announced.
Is that definitive and called at the moment?
That was announced as part of that package on the 9th of April. No siphon on transfers of land. Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman.
Okay. Ian Milne.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Norman, for your presentation. You talked there, about England going flat rate and the pace that has taken, so why would it be any different from here than from England to follow that same? And what effects have, if any, it has had on farming in England as a whole?
Well, I think we can actually look to England, I suppose, as an example. I mean, there are other member states, Germany, for example, which have gone flat rate within the lander. But in England, they did it over an 8-year period. I suppose what we have seen by looking at the experience of England is that the industry has been able to adjust and adapt to that approach. Now, the particular model that they chose to do that within England was to split England into effectively 3 regions. You had a moorland region, you had an SDA outside the moorland, and then you had another region. Now, going forward into this next phase of reform, they have decided to combine the other SDA and other area into one. And within the moorland area, I think it was announced just on Friday, that they were almost doubling, doubling the level of support within the moorland. Now, their moorland, very, very different from what we might see here in Northern Ireland. I mean, they were operating at about €35 per hectare, thereabouts. So they're looking at areas in which there's very low level intensity of agriculture going on, and doesn't really carry through into Northern Ireland. We have a different scenario here, but nevertheless they have identified an issue in terms of activity within the moorland, and therefore they have decided to actually double that rate of support up to €70 per hectare. So they will have a 2-region model, moorland, other, within England. So they are adjusting their model this time around. But in terms of the pace of progression towards flat rate, it was over an 8-year period.
Over an 8-year period.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Tom Buchanan.
Yeah, Chairman, one issue is obviously only the land linked to production now is eligible for entitlements from 2015. How are you going to protect against a scenario where you have the person who's letting the land, but he'll only let the land on the condition that the person that's taking the land claims the entitlements and pays them back to him, so he's getting them as well as getting the rent for the land? And obviously he's compelled, if you like, to take it if he wants to continue to keep on farming. We have a number of farmers who takes quite a bit of land in Conacre, and if they want to continue to produce, then they're compelled to do that or go out of business, one or the other. So how can you protect against a situation like that?
Well, when the entitlements are allocated in 2015, they belong to the person to whom they've been allocated. They don't belong to a piece of land. So if a farmer is renting land in Conacre and he uses that Conacre land to establish entitlements, those entitlements belong to that farmer. He can then use those entitlements on any piece of eligible land going forward. They are his entitlements, and he does with them as he wishes thereafter. And I suppose market forces will come into play here in terms of the land market. What we would expect, I suppose, generally, if landowners are excluded from the system, will probably be some upward adjustment in Conacre prices. I mean, that is the inevitable consequence of pumping money into agriculture. No matter how you do it, be it through coupled support, decoupled support, whatever the mechanism, it always feeds through to inflated land price. That is a very well-known consequence of agricultural support. We simply can't avoid that. But ultimately, the entitlements belong to the farmer.
Fair enough, yeah, okay. Just on that, the 5 hectare, 3 hectare argument and coming down to 3 hectare, will that make it easier for someone who is not an active farmer but has the land to actually try and dabble in active farming to the detriment then of production?
I don't actually see any significant issue around that. I mean, you think of somebody maybe just starting up and almost like a hobby type.
Yeah, well, just trying, just basically in the sole intention of keeping hold of an entitlement, and so they're forced to try some sort of farming that gets them over the qualification threshold.
Yeah, coming down. Yeah, I mean, yeah, bringing the threshold down from 5 down to 3 makes it easier for them to do that.
Maybe tempts them more into trying to actively farm, whereas they maybe have no capacity nor intention.
Well, I think I'm actually, you think of the scale of these operations, 3 hectares, was that 7.5 acres, thereabouts. I think anybody with that size of land holding, really, I think the easier thing for them to do is simply rent it out, maybe at a slightly higher rent than previously, and allow the active farmer to take all the hassle in terms of filling in the form, making sure the greening and cross compliance is all correct, and simply taking the Conacre rent at the end of the day, and not be bothered with all the administration and the paperwork that they would otherwise have.
Okay, Robin Swan.
Thanks, Chair. As I had just following up, the definition of active farmer, the negative list, have you any other intentions to add to it, or is there anything to see them?
No, that was one of the decisions that was announced. We don't see any particular reason to add to that negative list. Negative list comprises of businesses like waterworks, real estate services, railways, airports. You can add similar type businesses. The important thing is similar, so we don't think that we'll not have very many of these. All like, and really the active farmer, given its existence alongside the issue of Conacre, we think that probably in most cases what will happen is the likes of airports or whatever will be renting out their land anyway. That means that they will not be part of the regime. So it is only if they themselves had a farming enterprise that they would then have to go through the active farmer test. Whenever you add all this together, there's probably very, very few instances of where you would have to apply the active farmer test, and it is of relatively, very minor significance in our case.
Is there a sort of a minimum definition as to the agricultural activity that has to be taking place on a holding to be declared an active farmer?
I mean, the minimum activity is to maintain the land in good agricultural environmental condition. That's the minimum threshold that is set out within the regulation.
So if somebody was currently renting land out in Conacre now, if they just simply stopped, they would still be an active farmer, even if they're only taking silage or hay off them?
Yep, as long as there's nobody else involved on that land carrying out activity, and the only activity on that land is under the control by that individual. And as a minimum, the land is being maintained in good condition, then that is sufficient. But of course, by doing that, the individual is foregoing any conic rent that they would otherwise get.
Can I then ask, the inclusion of greenhouses and ground under greenhouses then, how does that tie in then as well with the active farmer test? So maybe my interpretation of greenhouses are different here than...
Well, I think it's commercial, first of all. You've got the 3 hectare minimum claim requirement. And I don't think that's really changed from what we currently have, and it's just a carry forward from what we had previously. Yeah. So I think if you had a farmer who had 3 hectares plus of greenhouses, and that's all he had, I think he's a very substantial farmer.
Okay, William Irwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I suppose I need to declare an interest being one that receives a single farm payment myself, so better declare that. Am I right in saying that it looks like as we move towards a flat rate payment that the larger landowner will benefit and the smaller medium-sized farm in the main and Northern Ireland will be the loser?
I don't think you get that correlation, because remember this is flat rate per hectare.
Yeah.
And so
but many small landowners received a reasonably sizable payment to produce a lot of. I have one farmer neighbour who owns 2 acres, and he has 150 cattle, and he receives a first sizable single farm payment. I mean, what I'm saying in the main, those farmers will lose, and the large landowner will benefit. Isn't that right?
Well, I think it really depends on his situation. What many farmers decided to do back in 2005 was to stack their entitlements on the area of land that they themselves owned, because they knew they had that land going forward, and therefore were not relying on conifer land.
Yeah.
In 2015, what farmers need to do is to declare all the land that they are farming, which includes land rented in, and they will establish their entitlements across all of that land.
Yeah.
So, for example, in that particular example, it may well be that farmer is farming quite a substantial area of land, and therefore then that pot of money that he will take out of this year into the new regime will be distributed across all the area of land that he's farming in 2015, and then progress towards flat rate from that point. So it really comes back to individual circumstances and I suppose the choices that farmers made back in 2005 and what they will do in 2015.
The analysis I have looked at would suggest that by business size, as we move towards a flat rate payment, that the small and very small farms will actually gain modestly from it. I suspect that's because large and medium farms would have, the most production as such, and therefore would have claimed the most subsidies in the past. So, we do get that sort of modest shift towards small and very small farms. Now, this is looking at it by business size. It doesn't quite correlate to the number of hectares, but it's probably there's some similarities in it.
Okay.
Joe Byrne. Mr. Chairman, in relation to the ANCs, has DARD finalised the sort of ANC land designation, be it on town land, majority soil type, or DEA determination on majority soil type?
Yep, that is very much still a work in progress. We have had some discussions with the Commission because we have still technical issues to be resolved around all of that. So no, we haven't gone to really moved much beyond where we were in December when we published on the website the indicative maps from the latest information we had at that stage. But that, stress that very much was a work in progress, and we still have to take that forward. We do know now at this stage.
Has the work on that been stalled until there's a determination of whether it's a single zone, 2 zone, or 3 zone region?
No, the issues are not correlated in any way. The designation of ANC is driven by, first of all, a set of criteria set out within the Rural Development Regulation, in terms of the primary designation criteria, and then a fine-tuning exercise that has to follow up thereafter. So it's an entirely independent process.
Yeah, but surely, but with ANC being such a massive piece or part of payment, whether it's Pillar 1, Pillar 2 must have a massive say in your Pillar 1 determinations, and even then your Pillar 2 determinations, depending on where it sits. Surely it has to be part of that. Surely it had to be part of the advice that you've given to the Minister.
Well, the issues, I suppose, are really independent in that the reason to have ANCs is you recognise that certain areas suffer constraints because of the conditions in which they farm. And therefore that's why you have the option of pushing in additional income support into those areas. But that's above and beyond what the Pillar 1 basic regime would do. So therefore it is in many ways an independent decision. It stands or falls on its own merits as to whether you should be pushing additional income support into those disadvantaged regions.
You have different deadlines for deciding Pillar 1 or Pillar 2. Can you remind us again what those deadlines are or were?
Yeah, if you wish to have an ANC top-up using Pillar 1, then that would have to be notified by the 1st of August.
Right, okay.
But you have the option of reviewing that decision by 1st of August 2016, I think it is, yes. Yep. So that's the Pillar 1 approach. Pillar 2, it's simply part of the rural development programme. So I suppose there's no deadline per se within that in terms of putting forward an ANC regime. You have much more flexibility, I suppose, in Pillar 2, in that you could run with an ANC for a period and then withdraw it from your programme, or even the other way around, introduce it into your programme. You have flexibility to introduce things or withdraw things from your programme over time. So you have that much higher level of flexibility there.
Okay. No one else has indicated to ask a question, but just final from me then. You talked earlier about England still using regions.
Yes.
Whereas one of the main debates here has been one region versus two region, or some would even talk about three region with regards to Merlin. Again, how do you think negotiations will go in the future when you look at the UK carve-up? If we are the only region that would go single region, and how does that look when GB looks across?
Yeah, I don't actually think that issue of itself will have any real significance in terms of the overall distribution of support. I mean, the fact is that Northern Ireland enjoys a significantly higher level of support per hectare on average than any other part of the UK, or even compared with the Republic of Ireland, or indeed the majority of member states. We do sit out on our own. So I don't really think whether it's a single region, whether it's two regions, will have any real bearing on that future debate as and when it may emerge. For example, if we were to go to a two-region model within Northern Ireland, in the Lowland region, average payment €379 per hectare. If you were sitting in Scotland, and if they have a two-region, they may have more, but say if they have a two-region model, they'll probably be sitting about €240 for a Lowland farmer. England will be sitting at about that level, Wales will be sitting at about that level, yet Northern Ireland Lowland farmer 50% higher. How is that any more defendable? If you have people in precisely the same position, Lowland producers, but in one region, the rate of support is 50% higher. So I don't think it really offers you any defence choosing a two-region model for that purpose. Yeah. So I think it really is. You have to judge these things on their own merits rather than necessarily what it might or might not give you in that bigger debate.
What's it different? You talked about the difference between Merland in England and Merland here.
Yeah.
What is the real difference? And is it is the real difference the fact that we do not have the capacity to measure it?
I think I think Wales is a very good example. They have, first of all, they have an established moorland map. But within the model that they're deploying, they're saying that moorland above 400 metres will attract a payment, I think it's €30 or 20 euros per hectare. 20 euros per hectare. If you actually applied that definition to Northern Ireland, and that accounts for about 12% of Wales would fall within that, you bring that across to Northern Ireland, something like 15,000 hectares out of about 1 million hectares would be above 400 metres. So, we simply don't have, the very significant moorland, very low productivity land that they would have in other parts of the UK. Within the moorland map that we created, we identified roughly about 100,000 hectares just on land cover. And the average payment within that, €186. So you can see it's a very different scenario that we face here within Northern Ireland. So I think that's why we need to focus on delivering a model that suits our conditions rather than necessarily looking too much at what's happening in other regions, because they are in a very different scenario compared with ourselves.
Okay, no further problems.
Just 100,000 acres of moorland in Northern Ireland.
In the map that we constructed simply for the analysis, it's within the consultation document. I think it's slightly under 100,000.
100,000 hectares.
100,000. Sorry, hectares. Yes.
Hectares.
About that.
Yeah.
Your definition of moorland was taken from?
It was a land cover map, a survey, the lands.
Land cover map
Land cover map.
2007.
Yeah.
As part of the countryside survey.
Yeah. And the land covers included within that acid grassland, fen, marsh and swamp, dwarf shrub, heath, bog and montane habitats. So it's a land cover classification. So there are, I suppose, many different definitions of you could apply to moorland. But if you applied the Welsh one, for example, you would have virtually none. Yeah.
Okay, no further questions. So again, thank you very much. That was a long session there for you. So thank you very much for all your presentation and all your answers to our questions. So
Okay,
again, thank you very much. And I'm sure you'll be no stranger to this committee over the coming weeks and months. Okay, thank you. Moving on then, members, to agenda item number 7. New Fisheries Bill. Oral briefing from Guard. I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 96 and papers from the department at pages 100. I'm not too sure whether they're here yet. Yeah, are they here? Okay.
And you're looking at the other
Can swap.
So yeah, you can swap. Give you time.
I'll set the music.
Okay, can I welcome John Terrington, Grade 7 Principal Officer, Mark McLaughlin, Grade 7 Chief Fisheries Officer, Ian Humes, Grade 7 Principal Officer, and Kenny Parker, DP Deputy Principal. You're very welcome to the committee to discuss this new fisheries bill. Members will have already had a chance to read your briefing paper, so can I ask you to take up to 10 minutes to address the committee, and then can I ask members to keep their questions concise and to the point, and of course a supplementary along with their questions if needed. And again, following the presentation, members will ask questions on that, but without further ado, I'm not sure who's leading off. John?
George Straw.
Okay, go ahead. If you can, thank you.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to address you on the policy proposals for a new fisheries bill, which, subject to executive agreement, we would hope to consult on later this year. Thereafter, with the aim of bringing the legislation through the Assembly by the end of the current mandate, recognising that that's a fairly tight timetable. Grateful for the opportunity to bring this to your attention as part of the process of engagement as we develop the proposals. As you said, I have with me Mark, who's the Chief Fisheries Officer, and Ian on my left, and Kenny, who have the sea fisheries and the aquaculture policy sides. By way of background, the current legislative position, sea fishing is mainly for the main commercial exploited species is regulated through the EU CFP, as you'll be aware, and that is implemented here through powers set out in legislation that in general applies across the UK, and that legislation has on a number of occasions been updated across the UK. However, the most recent update to this legislation was in 2009 via the Marine and Coastal Access Act for England and Wales, and a couple of changes subsequently in Scotland, which modernised enforcement powers. However, as this is obviously a devolved matter, the changes didn't extend on this occasion to Northern Ireland. While the EU legislates for most sea fishing activities, the Fisheries Act Northern Ireland 1966 regulates inshore fishing, primarily the 6-mile strip of sea adjacent to the coast, and it covers fishing vessels that mainly target shellfish via potting. As well as inshore fishing, the 66 Act also regulates the licensing of fish farms, both on land and at sea, for which the Department is responsible. Industry stakeholders through the Fisheries Forum recommended back in 2010 that legislation here should be reviewed and where appropriate brought into line with recent changes in primary fisheries legislation elsewhere in the UK, namely the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009. The Forum also recommended a review of the agricultural regulatory regime, and in developing the proposals thus far, we've had some brief informal meetings with industries, with representatives who would have been part of that forum. The Act to which they refer introduced for England and Wales certain changes to Fisheries Acts that they say that otherwise apply across the UK. The 2009 Act amended legislation to ensure inspection powers apply directly to enforceable community obligations and extended powers to allow for the imposition of conditions on sea fishing licences for marine environmental purposes and not just for fishing. This is in recognition that the EU legislation may require restrictions on fishing vessels in order to protect the environment. The Act also modernised and consolidated some enforcement powers insofar as they relate to vessels in British waters and to vessels registered in England and Wales, wherever they may be. Similar changes were made in Scotland in 2013. It also increased the deterrence for breaching fisheries legislation. As noted, subject to approval of the Executive, is proposed then to consult on proposals that would bring forward a new fisheries bill that would amend sea fisheries legislation primarily to bring forth the changes parallel to those that are already made in Britain, recognising that this is of course a devolved matter, but there is need for a common approaches when enforcement is often common in the Irish Sea, for example. I can go through half a dozen of the key proposals if you want, if there's time.
Yeah,
I know you have
certainly,
detail.
yeah.
I'll not go into any good detail. It is proposed to parallel with England and Wales and allow for the direct enforcement of the EU rules, that is both EU obligations and restrictions, so that it would apply in Northern Ireland waters and to Northern Ireland boats wherever they may be. It would also, as in the rest of the UK, extend the direct enforcement of enforceable EU obligations and restrictions from fishing boats to anyone, such as fish dealers whose activities are subject to EU rules on the regulation of commercial sea fisheries. We would also propose to align the common enforcement powers that are made available to the rest of the UK, and there are a number of those which with some details are provided. One of the key changes we'd also propose is to allow that powers in the 66 Act, 1966 Act would be extended to specifically allow for permit schemes. That is in recognition that the Department may, for example, need to limit the number of permits in relation to certain fishing activities whose activities may adversely affect the integrity of a European protected site. We can make permit schemes now, but we couldn't limit the number of permits that were issued, and there may be at a time when that will be necessary. The proposals would also cover an extension of fixed penalties to cover inshore offences. The Department first consulted on this in 2007 and is already in place for EU offences. However, for this to be extended to cover domestic offences, a primary change to the primary legislation would be needed. And again, this is already in place in Britain for inshore offences. It is also proposed to align the maximum penalties available to the courts for breaches of fisheries legislation in parallel with those that apply in the rest of the UK. Other proposals include a power to set maximum size limits for sea fish, where, for example, if there were evidence that releasing larger, more likely shellfish, it would help their stocks. We would also allow for a vessel or equipment an owner who's suspected of having committed a certain offence to enter an agreement to have his gear released so that he could continue to fish pending a court's consideration of the case. On aquaculture, the key change is the introduction of a single aquaculture licence. At the moment, there are 2 licences for marine environments, a fish culture licence and a fishery licence, and it would really just be a sort of tidying up and trying to make that better regulated. We'd also like to formalise and regulise the administrative process related to transferring licences, where the licensing doesn't say we can't, so we've set up an admin process to allow that to happen, where, for example, within a family or by sale of an outside party, there may be a wish to transfer it, and this would provide both parties with legal protection during that process. In line with DFP policy on fees and charges, it also proposed to include a power to allow to charge or cover the cost of fish farm licensing. The introduction of any charges may have the effect of preventing speculative applications, which it currently occurs, by parties not wishing to pursue long-term aquacultural business, which in turn may have detrimental effects on the level of potential development. Finally, it's proposed to extend licensing to cover farming of seaweed and other marine resources, and not just as it currently is fish and shellfish, in order to give potential developers the exclusive rights afforded to license shellfish and finfish farms at their sites. I also want to say that we will also take the opportunity to make amendments to legislation as relates to the Lochs Agency. In 2012, the North-South Ministerial Council made a commitment to allow for, following the St Andrews Agreement, to allow for fixed penalties for angling offences in the foil area, and the fisheries legislation would allow us to do that at the same time. I should also mention that DCAL, who have responsibilities within the 1966 Act for inland fisheries, is considering changes insofar as it relates to their responsibilities. We're discussing with DCAL officials what scope there is for bringing the amendments through at the same time, albeit they will be responsible for it. Work continues on developing these proposals, including with legal advice. Subject to that being clear into the agreement of the Executive, it's anticipated the consultation would begin over the summer recess. Following full consultation and the consideration of the responses, a bill will be drafted with the aim of introducing it to Assembly this time next year, and thereafter bringing the legislation into force within the lifetime of the current Assembly. We would, of course, keep the committee informed of the progress of the development of the consultation and further brief the committee on the outcome and of the detailed proposals which we would hope to include in the draft bill. We're content to come back prior to that if the committee would find it helpful. In the meantime, we're happy to take any questions and comments you have for now.
Okay, thank you very much, John, for that detailed presentation and within time, so thank you very much. I suppose a number of questions I'll put out to members, but how do you propose, having obviously we're the ones that will be, well, probably the ones that are going to be scrutinising this bill once it comes in draft form, and this is of course pre-consultation. How do you propose to consult with the stakeholders and actually get, not just to tick a box that you've consulted, but actually delve down right into the heart of the stakeholder groups and not only speak to the POs, but also circumvent maybe even groups also to make sure that you're hearing everything and every voice. And do you see that as being a barrier and a factor that you'll have to concern yourself with?
But from a personal point of view, I think it's an essential thing to do. As I said in the presentation, we kicked off by having some conversations with quite a wide and diverse set of people to get a feel for what issues that they thought were. And to be fair, in some cases there weren't an awful lot. A lot of their concerns might be about the subordinate legislation that the power is already there for, and no proposal, and those are ongoing conversations that my colleagues would have with them. But in doing that, we said it very clearly that that was the first of an ongoing conversation that we saw happening, and said it when they would have the opportunity to feed into it, both at the formal side, perhaps with the committee, but before that, and it certainly would be my intention to reconvene those sessions and widen them as necessary to actually try and better explain what it is we're trying to do and hear better what they say, what they believe.
Whilst you will consult on principles of a fisheries bill, will you then consult on the draft bill?
Timing, I don't imagine will allow full consultation on the bill itself. But if it were possible, yeah. But at this stage, I don't think looking at the timetable and the constraints on the likes of the OLC, I think it might be difficult to do that. But hopefully, their involvement will during the drafting of the bill will at least see some of their or where appropriate and where relevant and where possible included.
Okay, Michelle McAvey.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to pick up on that point, I suppose I would be concerned that you haven't left yourself enough time to do that consultation, because as a committee we're obviously concerned. We're looking at the reservoirs bill and the consequences of perhaps not scrutinising that bill with stakeholders at that particular stage in advance of coming to us has proved a challenge. You did mention the overlap with decal, and wearing my decal hat, we looked at salmon conservation, and obviously the 1966 Fisheries Act was something which was referred to. Just be interested at this stage. You have said that officials are considering changes. Are you aware at this stage what they may be and the level of those changes?
I'm not too sure how far they've gone clearing with their own ministers. You'll forgive me if I don't, but I know they were talking to Lochs Agency along the lines of the fixed penalties for want of a better term, domestic angling offences, decriminalising fishing out of season with a run line or without a licence and things like that, and that would be in line with what the Lochs Agency had looked to do. Beyond that, what I can say is they've been involved in a fairly long exercise with their stakeholder groups, and I know that work is ongoing, or is at least well advanced. But I couldn't say for sure what the outcome of that is. But as I say, I've some indication of some of the things that they might want, but it's only been out of courtesy that they've copied us in to say I don't know how far it's gone up the clearances, or again whether that is in line with what their stakeholders have looked at.
And there are also overlaps then with DOE around the Habitats Directive and aquaculture and so on as well. Will the consultation via a further department then cause issue for you with your timescales?
We've had initial conversations with the Marine Unit in DOE, and one of the next things to do after this is to make that a bit more formal once we start to finalise the proposals that they are. Besides that, there's an ongoing conversation that we have with them, primarily around, well, I would say aquaculture. It's not; it would be both sides of the house. It will depend. I mean, if we can't get agreement to what we're proposing, then it could cause. But we don't foresee that what we have proposed will cause. In fact, some of the things are providing additional protections, but time will tell.
Okay, and you'll be aware I represent a fishing village, and obviously this is going to be quite close to the hearts of some of my constituents, and I will want to take the opportunity to speak to a number of the stakeholders about this. But I suppose I do have a concern that perhaps in the absence of a long-term vision for sustainable fishing fleet within Northern Ireland, that those who currently skipper boats will feel that this could add a further level of bureaucracy and a further burden on an industry which is currently hard pressed. Do you foresee that this could create further issue for them?
I'm going to say no. I don't foresee, but others may have a comment, or you may have a view. But the likes of the permitting power, which particularly mentioned, I mean, that certainly is something that inshore fisheries people are keen to see, because at some point, rather than reducing the take that any one individual can have to a point where it is non-economic, it may be more appropriate to limit based on historical fishing, for example. So there has been a call for, particularly in the inshore, where a lot of our industry has been driven, to increase and improve enforcement, and or at least modernise it, and that's really the aim. I don't think there's an awful lot at this point that I would see as being further, but that's what consultation's for, and if they see differently, we'll certainly report back.
Just as a final question at this stage, I know that it is early days, but do you foresee any cost to the industry for implementation of this?
The only cost, and I've said, is certainly the potential of seeking for full cost recovery for licensing, which we don't have the power to do. I couldn't put a cost on that because, one, it would be a subordinate power, and only at that stage when it would go through the rigours of that part of the scrutiny would we be able to put a cost on it. But there are very few new licences in aquaculture. Anyway, so it's not a major burden. I'm trying to think if there's anything else no. I mean, most of it, a lot of it's about our enforcement and would be done within our own resources. There's not an awful lot being put out, I don't think, in the proposals on industry itself.
Okay.
It's not the intention.
And at this stage, do you feel that this is necessary, this piece of legislation?
Certainly the alignments with the Marine Coastal Access Act, I think are. It will leave us, it could leave us in a difficult position if we have different enforcement powers long term than the rest of the enforcement agencies across these waters.
Okay.
And in fact, some or most of the powers would align with what the case in the south of Ireland as well. They would already have most of these powers.
I'll come round again if need be. Joe Byrne, Deputy Chairperson.
Thanks, Chairman, and welcome to the presentation. At the outset, I'm asking, what is the objective of this bill? Is it to have more EU regulation and compliance, or is it about growing a fishing industry? And secondly, how much consultation has taken place with the private sector? There are some larger-than-life characters like Mr. Rooney, who in the past has lobbied us, Chairman, in Brussels and here, about the lack of urgency, desire or appetite by the Department to listen to their concerns and their issues to develop a more viable, growth-based fishing industry. Over to you guys.
First part of your question, if I can remember what it was, apologies.
But EU
The objectives of the bill. The two or three things that I opened up with in terms of aligning with the legislation in the rest of the UK are, we believe, things that we are duty bound to do. Once that's done, it gives us an opportunity to look at other things, including, for example, the licensing of aquaculture. It's not, I don't think, about any of the EU references are not about bringing in more EU legislation. It's EU legislation that would apply, but it's a more effective way of introducing it, but we can do so directly. We would perhaps run the risk of infraction if we had to wait and bring in further regulation rather than being able to do it directly. We have spoke with representatives of the fishing industry widely, and in terms of the bill, have noted the concern perhaps around aquaculture as to whether there's sufficient urgency in the licensing process. It is what it is. Do you want to say something more about the longer term?
I just think that the proposal for the main area of interest to me in sea fisheries policy is on the inshore fishing and the permitting of inshore fishing and providing some clarity there. I think it's appropriate that we have those powers, that we then bring forward permit schemes which are properly negotiated and consulted with the industry on. For example, I was picking up what I was saying about South Down and, you know, a plan for the industry. The vision for the industry is to have an industry which is based on sustainable fishing. It has to be based on sustainable fish stocks. That is a prerequisite. If you don't have a healthy fish stock, you will not have a healthy fishing industry. Then other things come into play which are difficult. Market conditions, for example, things like the cost of fuel, other factors that are external that affect the viability and economic sustainability of the industry. But fundamentally, we're talking about having a healthy fish stock and a properly managed fish stock. And if you look at what has happened in the inshore area in recent years, that has been the area of growth. From about 2007 through to 2011, we saw about another 40 or so vessels join the under-10 fleet fishing for crabs and lobsters off County Down coast. On the other hand, the larger fleet fishing for prawns has remained reasonably constant, and that's based on a quota-based system. Now, there isn't any quota for crab and lobster, and that is the area of pressure now. And the more people that are involved in that, the more difficult it becomes for others to make a decent living. So having a permit scheme that we can have a consultation with the industry about, in terms about things like effort control, do you limit the amount of effort on the fishery by having seasonal closures? Do you do it by the number of pots they can deploy? Do you do it by the length of the animals that they can take? Those are all things that you can build into a particular permit scheme. We can do things at the moment by making licence variations. Their fishing licence is a general permission to fish, and we can introduce prohibitions, for example, to prevent them from fishing in certain places. But that can only apply to the vessels that we license, and we cannot apply some of those conditions to, say, visiting vessels from Scotland or from the south. With our permit scheme and with this new framework of legislation, we can provide a better system, I think, for the protection of the inshore fisheries and the protection of the resources that we're there to manage. I mean, it's in everybody's interest, in our common interest, to have a healthy, prosperous fishing industry, but the starting point for that, what underpins it all, is having healthy fish stocks. And that's, as far as I am regarded, is what this legislation is here to do. There are a number of other aspects in there to do with the way we monitor and control and, if you like, police the industry. Those fall to Mark and his fisheries officers. I'm interested in fisheries management and the management of the wild stock that we have there, which is we must exploit sustainably if there is to be a fishing industry for the longer term that is going to contribute to the economic well-being of the coastal communities that depend on it.
Chairman, I accept what's been said in relation to the external factors of fishing under the common fisheries policy, and we're at the mercy of what happens at sea. In relation to a fishing development plan, are DARD pursuing such an objective? And secondly, what are they doing about promoting fish farm development?
As far as a fisheries development plan for wild fisheries, the answer is no, and I'm not quite sure, whenever that term is used, what would be in a fisheries development plan for wild fisheries. We have a number of stocks which are scientifically monitored, and the safe harvest rate is established. For aquaculture, I suppose that depends on individuals coming forward who are willing to invest in aquaculture opportunities. And
just on that, for your information, you mentioned individual in Southdown, Mr Rooney, and Mr Rooney has just obtained licences from Dard to enable him to cultivate oysters in Carniford Loch. So I think, listening to Ian, he's absolutely right. We must understand that there's only a certain number of fish in the sea, and consequently there can only be a certain size of industry. And looking at the past 30 years, we've seen a great deal of pressure on that natural resource, and there has been a great deal of contraction in the fishing industry. What has happened in relation to the department decommissioning vessels? Those individuals who have taken advantage of those schemes have often bought smaller boats, and they're now operating in the inshore arena in small, what we call -10, under 10 metre boats, potting and fishing for crab, lobster, a few other species in the inshore area, because they're fishermen, it's in their blood, rid of their trawler, and they're moving to the inshore sector. Some of these adaptations to the Act will enable us to take a better control of the inshore sector. We're under considerable pressure at the moment in Strangford to introduce a restrictive permit scheme in line with our obligations to the EU. This is against a backdrop of infraction. The complainant is more or less content with the arrangements we've put in place so far, with the exception of the permit scheme, which we've yet to devise properly with local fishing. So, an argument that's upcoming, our intertidal shelf fishing, which has a great deal of opposition from environmental groups for a variety of environmental reasons. The amendments to the Act will allow us to control that, so that we can demonstrate to others that it would be sustainably exploited. And aquaculture, we do face pressure on occasion to get aquaculture licences. Currently, the department puts enormous amounts of effort into doing this. We have to carry out habitats regulations assessments on the development, and in combination assessments in relation to other aquaculture activities that currently exist. People who make application for these licences face no cost. The department bears the cost. And I would say, looking at the last 25 years, probably 50% of the consents the department has worked to produce have never led to a development. So it's a waste of our investment, a waste of time and money spent to AFBI to carry out these assessments. Importantly, for people who are more genuine about developing, and I include John Rooney in this, the land that is licensed to aquaculture is then locked out from other development because the consent exists for it, even if it's not developed. So I think an appropriate charging structure, maybe a two-tier charging structure where individuals aren't paying anything until in production. We can think these things through with our stakeholders, but it does need change to get the sort of future investment and industry that we all want.
Thanks, John.
Okay, Robin Swan.
I want you to go and disagree with red herring.
Okay, very good, Joe. Robin Swan.
Thanks, Chair. Gentlemen, where does this new bill sit? 1966 Fisheries Act.
It will be a new Fisheries Act that would amend in part the 1966 Fisheries Act, but would also amend, and I've mentioned UK-wide legislation. One would be the Sea Fish Conservation Act 1967 would be the key one. So it would be an amendment that would amend both of those and some subsequent changes.
Right, and DARD has resource set aside for this.
To bring forward the bill? Yes, I am the head of a small bill team tasked with that.
That's priority within the department?
I'm led to believe, having resourced it, that it will be a priority, or one of the priorities, I'm sure.
I suppose one of the biggest concerns, and I was coming from where Michelle was coming through DCAL when we did the work on Oliver was there at the time with the salmon review. And the DCAL minister in that stage, actually I have a quote here from her answers, a review of the Act will be resource intensive and is not currently a priority for the department. Now that's for the Department of Culture, Arts and Leisure.
Yeah.
So would you be reviewing the entire Act or the Act just as it was pertinent to yourselves?
It would be for ourselves what DCAL have said, and I hope I haven't spoken out of turn by saying that they certainly will see if there are some things that they could do in parallel that wouldn't be a full review of their their powers. And as I say, just out of good nature, I thought I'd point that is the case because, in terms of the papers coming, they will cover, if they do come forward, they will cover both issues, but obviously it will be their responsibility to bring those forward. But they see it as, I presume they then foresee it not as a full review, but just as an opportunity to do it on the back of the changes that we're making.
And if they didn't, John, would you be left with a difference then? And I'm thinking of prosecution, I suppose, more so than anything else. The difference between inland fisheries and offshore fisheries, where you might have a convergence with England, Scotland and Wales, but a completely different system onshore and offshore.
There are some overlapping powers in terms of in terms of the enforcement powers within the 66 Act that apply to both Yard insofar as its responsibilities and to decal in terms of salmon and trout. At this stage, there's no suggestion to change very many of them or any of those. If we were to change them to our advantage, obviously that would have to be cleared and with them as a consequential, which would happen. But for the most part, their interest it will primarily be on angling, where we won't have an interest or a concern. I don't see that being a particular issue.
Okay. The licensing and agriculture licences and remarks been through this. Do you see any amendments or changes there that would increase maybe the availability or the potential of more salmon farms offshore?
Well, we have had an approach from individuals interested in salmon farming, but the industry went through a sort of growth phase in the 1980s, consolidation phase in the 1990s, a sort of acquisition phase in the 2000s, where the industry matured, and small farms were bought by bigger farms, and I think it's unlikely that we're going to see significant investment in that sector because it's so capital intensive. We have one salmon farm in Northern Ireland that has been recapitalised a couple of times, and it survives on both its organic status and the quality of its produce. We have very limited ability to provide sites for salmon farms because we don't really have the natural topography that is necessary to provide shelter in shore waters. And we have a great deal of marine habitat that is designated, which would be inconsistent with salmon farming. The amendments to the Act really streamline the proposed amendments. They really streamline the licensing process. It was necessary to have 2 licenses, really because aquaculture, when it was initially developed, concentrated on native species and natural animals in the marine environment here, and the 2-tier licensing process is to give somebody who's licensed to produce shellfish, let's say oysters, ownership of the oysters in the site he is operating on, because ostensibly in law they would be public property unless there was this 2-tier approach. Now animals in aquaculture are largely non-native, rainbow trout and the Gigas oyster, the Pacific oyster, and we can dispense with this 2-tier thing if we make the amendments. I don't see that the amendments themselves are going to lead to a demand for additional salmon farming, for example, for the reasons I've mentioned.
Okay. Can I ask you, now, more to Joe's point in regards to, we understand about sustainability and we understand that fisheries has to be sustainability and it has to go by the number of fish and creatures within there to fish. That concept is a given. But how can you convince the committee and myself that this isn't just basically a refreshing of regulations for you, tightening your grip, sharpening your sword and dipping it in gold? How can you assure us at this early primitive stage that that isn't just what it's about? Because there is, when you speak to the fishing industry, even yesterday we met with the Fisheries Forum. They were crying out for better facilities for schooling for learning young people the craft of fishing, and making sure that the facilities were there. Now, is there nothing there to help build capacity that could actually be placed within this fisheries bill, so that it isn't all about permits, about regulation, about licensing, and about control? Because basically those words all mean regulation, and everyone is sick to the back teeth now of regulation, not least fishermen and trawlermen and farmers. And also then, what will this bill do to help Mr. Rooney, who we mentioned? I don't mind mentioning, because he did come to us many months ago when we met him out in Brussels. He was the only company representing Northern Ireland at that the expedition or the exhibition out there. And yet he was telling us of the problems that he was having, and it was all about time of obtaining licensing and permits for Carlingford. Now, I'm glad that has been resolved now, but again, if that's only been resolved now, you can understand the build-up for frustration that would bring on a businessman that just wants to make money and increase employment, which is most important in my mind. Also, the work then that's being done, activity that has been done over the last 2 seasons, maybe up in the north coast, up around Rathlin, around pot fishing, trying to bring some sort of structure regulation there, which was proving difficult. Again, I don't have an update on that, but where does this bill tie in to all of that work that's necessary and needs to be done and needs to be quickened up? And all the capacity building, all the schooling, all the infrastructure that needs to be in place for the fishing industry moving forward. Where do we see that in this bill? And is this just basically, is this stick? Where's the cart in this bill? Because this will ultimately have to be passed. It'll be us that scrutinise it. It'll be the Assembly that passes it. If it's all paying, you'll have a hard task in doing that. Even if it is for the betterment in the long term of fisheries, even if it is about sustainability, try convincing that to us if it's all paying.
There are a number of things that you raised there as issues that are of concern to the industry, and I'm not so sure that this bill will tackle some of those issues, because, for example, in some of the things that you mentioned in relation to the individual who was applying for the licence, there were particular issues there to do with neighbours, and there were particular issues there to do with, as I understand it, environmental assessments and other things. That in some respects is due process. In dealing with, you were talking to the industry, and where is the provision for schooling and where is the provision for that? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the bill, Chairman. There can be other ways in which this is achieved, and one of the ways in which it is achieved is the European Fisheries Fund, for example, in developing sustainable fishing communities. We have a flag which is based in Downpatrick, which has had several calls for grant. We have supported one project which is going to see considerable financial support for people who are going to be the skippers of the future. We do recognise that the training opportunities generally are in short supply. It's not, you don't go into every town and find a training facility for a skipper for a boat, and we must make sure that we have another generation coming through. And the kinds of projects that the flag can support are some of those things that help build on the fish that is landed. If you put a load of catch on the quayside in Port of Oakey, what do you then do with it? And can your local community benefit from that catch in some way by having it and developing and looking at niche markets, developing opportunities for new products? It's difficult to enter the, maybe the bigger major supermarket there, but there are other examples of where entrepreneurs involved in fish processing in Northern Ireland have done very, very well. take Walter Ewing and Glenarm Salmon, the relationship that they have there, putting in quality product into top London stores were sold at a premium price, going for markets in the Middle East, going for markets in China, the new developing markets. You could see opportunities there to take some of the material that we have, perhaps that is going into bread at Scampi at the moment, and going into products on a supermarket shelf, ending up in something that adds a little more value, goes into maybe the ready meal market and other things. To a large extent, you know, we in the department can't really force that agenda. It is something that entrepreneurs see an opportunity for, and we can help and enable that. We can help with maybe bringing some things to market. We can help with identifying the possibilities of market for them. You did mention Mr. Rooney as being the sole representative in Brussels. He is also benefiting from financial support that was made available through the EFF to help him attend these events. And I know that he generously brings products from other people to those events. And you, I think, had the opportunity last year to meet with him. So that's coming up shortly. It's coming up next week. And he'll be out there again flying the flag. So I think that certainly from my perspective, and I go back to providing the right framework for the management of fisheries, which is, you know, I see this as being something that is a co-management thing. It's something that you do in consultation. We have continuously heard over the last number of years, and I think Mark, who's been in this business a lot longer than I have, would have said that there has been a change. There is an industry which is calling out for appropriate structures to enable them to make a living. You know, we're no longer... Those rules are sometimes welcomed rather than things that are to be said, you know, this is placing an unnecessary burden on the industry, because there are issues to do with quality, even landing crabs, in terms of landing white crabs, and that we need to make regulations for. And where I see some of the benefits as well is that instead of getting involved in making legislation to simply replicate something which is already there in a European legislation, we then have more time to focus on some of the other things to do with raffle and to do things and say the landing of soft crabs. But we must prioritise, and we must prioritise in terms of what's going to hit us. You know, if we don't do this, we could get hit with infraction. We would like to be able to do something else that will be for the mutual benefit of everybody engaged in the industry. But you know, this will help us. But not everything needs to be in the bill. There are other ways in which we can bring about the kind of change that people want.
Okay. Michelle McBean.
Oh, thank you very much. And just going back on the point that you made with regards to crab and lobster, and I accept that the need for sustainable fishing. But there is the Lobster Conservation of Stocks Regs, 1997. How has that been implemented, and have there been any convictions on the basis of that? I'm just wondering then how the new Fisheries Act will then, or the new Fisheries Bill will then address, are there gaps within those regulations that need to be amended?
I'm not familiar with. Well, there's very constant activity on shellfish enforcement. In fact, it's probably the area where we're most active. It's quite usual to have 2 or 3 cases of various forms of breach of the regulations in with the public prosecutions service at one time.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, there will be convictions. I think one area where this amendment will help is in the fixed penalty aspect, because if a young fellow goes out there and behaves foolishly and is unfortunate enough to get caught, and it happens every summer. Mm-hmm. Currently, if it's detected, he goes to the court system. It can have quite serious unforeseen consequences. He only goes to the court system if the evidence is robust. He will, under what's proposed, he will still have the ability to go through the court system if he believes that the evidence is inadequate for conviction. But under what is proposed, he will also have the ability to take a fixed penalty, like a speeding ticket, and short-circuit everything. And no doubt with good legal advice, he'd make his choice. I'll take my speeding ticket, I'll take my chance in court. So it's, it's hard to take the chairman's, to appreciate what the chairman is. It's hard to see any carrots in this, but there may be a shortening of the stick, and it's absolutely fundamental when managing a natural resource that you have an adequate legislative package to enable you to do so. And we're dealing with a finite natural resource here, and we need a robust act to enable us to manage it properly. And that includes the shellfish sector, lobsters and crabs. I think that in terms of that particular enforcement activity, what's proposed here by admin penalty will be a great help to both fishermen and to the enforcers.
Okay, but you can currently enforce with the regulations that you have in place at the moment?
Yeah, there are areas where we might want to be tighter, without talking about specifics here, one person's interpretation of law or something. But we do have a reasonable armoury of regulations. We will have more going forward, and the Rathen area will be one where we have to act to prevent mobile gear doing any further environmental damage within the SAC. It's not as though we have, we're drawing a line and saying going forward we won't have any more regulations. I'm sure we'll have plenty to keep us all amused.
It's worth saying that the part under which that is made, the Section 124 of the Fisheries Act, is a fairly wide power, and it isn't anticipated that needs change. There may or may not be need to change regulations made underneath that, but I think that power would have served well, and there may be lobbies saying that the regulation needs to be tightened or otherwise. But it's an existing power that would be unlikely to need changed, and certainly the conversations we've had with stakeholders, their interest might have been in the details of some of those regulations. There might be a conversation the department has to have, or is continuing to have, about the details in those. But the overarching power would seem to be robust enough.
Okay, and just with reference to the policy document which you've sent to us, which was in paragraph 18, you talk about the need to amend legislation to introduce fixed penalties and so on. And I do appreciate that there was an introduction of secondary legislation, but you said this was consulted on in 2007. Have you consulted recently on that as well?
No, but we formed part of this. I mean, at that point, the conclusion was that, yes, we would introduce it, but we had the primary power because it came from Europe to do it for offences that came from Europe, but we didn't have it. But obviously, it forms part of this, or would form part of this consultation.
But you haven't done anything in the interim in relation to consultation on it? Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alderman McMullen.
Just thank you, Chair. Just quickly, can I go back to the farm salmon? You did say that there doesn't seem to be any expansion on it. I would like you to look at that again, because the farm salmon that I'm looking at every day has nearly doubled in size and in numbers. And indeed, from what I'm told, it's going through another expansion. And another part of the business could be moved to Red Bay.
Oh, I'm aware of that.
Yes.
No, I mean, in terms...
Who regulates that? Now, I'm told that you do your business through the Crown Estate. Who regulates all of that there? Because as Robin said there, and fishermen are now asking the question, this can go on and on and on. It's like a piece of string. There's no end to it. Can we regulate the numbers of salmon farms that are put into seawater along our coast? We only have really the one at the minute.
We have one salmon farm on two sites.
Right.
There are three consents necessary for a salmon farm. There's the permission of the landowner, the Crown Estate. You have to have a lease in the Crown Estate, assuming that the site is in the Crown Estate territory. And you then need a licence from ourselves to cultivate fish. Then you need a discharge consent under the water order. You now need an additional marine construction licence from DOE. A discharge consent under the water order issued by DOE, which allows you to put substance into the water which is feeding fish. It is that consent, the water order discharge consent, which ultimately restricts the amount of salmon you can produce, because it will restrict you on the amount of material you can add into the sea. So it's a feed limited industry. That's the limiting factor, is the discharge consent which is worked out by DOE.
The marine, the discharge consent granted by under the water order will specify a specific tonnage fish that has to be held in those cages, the maximum tonnage, and the licence holder can't exceed that.
Well, could you tell me what is the licence tonnage in the one we're talking about? Because we've went from 3 to 4 cages. We're now up to nearly double figures. I think we're not far off double figures. Yep. And from what I'm told, there is other cages allowed to go in. They're not in yet, but will be going in a short space of time.
Well, the consent that's been issued by DAR doesn't restrict the number of cages; it restricts the area. Mm-hmm. That particular method of producing salmon calls for a very low stocking density. About a third of the salmon per cage then would be in a conventional system under their own organic rules. I'm not sure. There's several ways of. There's several bodies that authorise it. I think maybe the Sword Association in this case. So more cages doesn't necessarily mean more fish, but we know that Northern Salmon Company or Glenarm Organic Salmon do wish to expand, and they do have an application with DOE under that piece of legislation I mentioned to alter their discharge consent to up their production.
What they're proposing to do is the site, they have the 2 sites, Red Bay and Glenarm Bay. They wish to let the site at Glenarm go fallow for a period of time, which is recognised good husbandry practice, enable the seabed or any other benthos in the area to be monitored. They intend to go and do environmental assessments to check the whole area. In the interim, to keep their business operational, they want to have a temporary increase in the quantity of salmon that can be held in their Red Bay site. And then once the following period ends, then they would revert back to the original, but they've applied to the NIEA Water Management Unit for that consent.
Can I take that'll go into consultation?
I presume I'm not 100% familiar with the DOE procedures, but I presume there'll be.
I would think so.
They would have to.
There's been no mention of it at all.
It's only recently.
Yeah.
It's only recently been applied for. I understand it's only been the last week or maximum 2 weeks. It's only been with the Easter holiday period. Their DOE were in touch with us.
That'll be found out for me and maybe come back to me on that there, back to the committee as well, because I think we have to look at regulation here on these fish farms. Notwithstanding that it is a good business, but there's an environmental aspect here as well we have to take into consideration, as was done, and there doesn't seem to be any consultation, anything done at all on this here, and I've been watching this year in, year out, and not once has an elected rep ever been approached, asked.
Well, I can maybe give you some comfort. There is a group called the River Bush Catchment Stakeholder Group, which the Glens Anglers are represented on. Last summer, Mr McMillan gave a presentation up in Armoy relating to the impacts of the salmon farm on the East Coast, East Antrim. And it included video stills from the underwater monitoring, which is carried out by DOE Marine Division, who dive below the cages and carry out a proper scientific transect measuring the species and the biodiversity. And people at that meeting were were content that the DOE was observing its obligations in relation to monitoring, and that the environmental impacts were pretty mundane. There's some physical impacts. There were tyres that had fallen off the wellboat, which were lying on the seabed. There were a couple of bags, and the video showed that one of the tyres was inhabited by a lobster. So there were scallops there, and there was some what they call epiphytic growth of algae as well. So there has been some stakeholder feedback in relation to the monitoring of the salmon farm, but it is wholly a DOE matter. It's under our 66 Act, Section 11, our responsibility is to licence the cultivation of the fish. The environmental aspects are dealt with by DOE's Marine Division.
Well, I'll not dwell too much longer, but we need to know a wee bit more about this here, because if they're going to up and move the Red Bay out of Glenarm, let Glenarm Leaf follow, we need to know the period of time, everything else. This has been done through the back door, without any consultation locally or anything else. I do feel that there needs to be a bit of consultation with the local communities, not just the fishing community, but the local communities as well. And I think that needs to be done, because only we're finding out ourselves, nobody's telling us. And we would like to know that how long is that going to take in Red Bay before they move back. If they move back, from what I'm hearing, they may not move back. So we need to find out, those are the questions we need to be finding out. You know, if that could be done, or if there, whatever way you can do with that, contact the DOE or whatever, we need to find that out. Need to be consultation with the local community.
Again, if you could get the information that you have to Oliver, you know, it can be a private constituency matter.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I'll undertake to come back to you, Mr. McMillan.
Please, if you could.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Joanne Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I apologise for missing your briefing? It was education question time, so my question may already have been asked, or probably has. I'm just thinking, obviously, the views of the industry will be key to any proposals within the bill, to make sure. The industry said in 2010 that legislation should be reviewed when appropriate. When were appropriate, amended. How widely do you plan to consult?
If I can take that. Well, we did say earlier that we've had some initial conversations in getting this far with a range of groups who, by their nature, brought with them a range of their members from Strangford up to the north coast, and a commitment to them that as we develop this further during the more formal consultation period, that we would repeat and extend that where necessary.
How many groups would that be? Is that
well, if I can tell you who we've talked to so far, and I just want to get them, because I want to get their names right. And I say this was as much as in helping us formulate. It would be different, and we'd probably extend this where necessary in order to take wider views when we actually have wider proposals discussed with them. Apologies, I can't find. Oh, I've got them, sorry. The Northern Ireland Fish Producers Organisation, the North Coast Lobsters Fishermen's Association, the North East Crab and Lobster Committee, the Anglo North Irish Fish Producers Organisation, Seafish, as well as aquaculture producers. At each one, or most of those, there would be half a dozen or more individuals with their own individual interests. So, well, I mean, I'm not going to quality assure that, but I thought we were quite pleased with those that turned up, and I think and I hope they were quite pleased with the opportunity to do that, and with the promise to continue that, and that was the start of a conversation rather than the end of a conversation. I guess time will tell whether that is wide enough and sufficient enough. Okay. I noticed in your briefing that you're proposing some changes to legislation in relation to inland fisheries, and obviously the cross-cutting with decal. How closely then have
officials been working on this issue, and will the initial scoping on this issue be completed in time for your proposed consultation?
It is a decent question. I mean, we've been speaking to them for some period of time. Whenever we said we were doing this out of good nature, we pointed out that we were likely to be doing it in the coming months, and we have spoken to them. But at the other hand, we've also said that our responsibility is the sea fisheries and agriculture side, and that will be our primary. If there is an opportunity provided by doing something in parallel with us, we'll certainly be open to that, and the resource that they have to put to that. I explained earlier that I know they had some initial ideas that they felt they could do, but that they were sounding their stakeholders, and that's a process that is ongoing. Whether it all comes together in time, at the end of the day, we're aware of our timetable and the constraints there are on that, and they're aware of where we are and what they would need to do in order to parallel that, and for to use the sort of parallel process.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, no other members have indicated they want to ask questions, but can I just going back, and I know I'm keeping this at a high level, but going back to the cart and stick and the fact that this may just well be all stick and it may just need to be shortened. With that, it may be hard enough to get a piece of legislation of that nature through any scrutiny body and through any elected chamber. What happens if this doesn't pass?
There are some issues that I think we would be at risk, and would be in difficulty by having different enforcement regimes, not so much in the inshore, but in the wider. So with our colleagues in other UK, we run risk of infraction by not being able to directly enforce EU legislation. There is a lot of legislation going back, and you have made the point about the amount of regulation that there is, so things could continue to be regulated as they are. I must say that there has been a call in those that we have spoken to, and in some of the consultation that went out on the sustainable inshore fisheries policy about increased enforcement or better enforcement in the inshore. There is a recognition that those that have been doing this for a while are at risk, or their livelihood at risk. So, to reiterate what both the gentlemen either side of me have said about the importance of the stick, I don't know that there would be entire resistance to refining some of this, because it could be seen as being a greater deterrent or a better way of dealing with the problem, that those that are doing it within the law and are doing it properly are at risk of those that perhaps aren't as well behaved.
Okay. To add to that, Chairman, I think there'll be relatively little appetite for this, because it's not a bag of carrots, it's a bag of sticks. Where do we lose going forward? We lose competence, and that's the bottom line. Unless you have a decent regulatory structure, you don't have competent management. So we won't be competent to streamline aquaculture applications. We won't be competent to offer an admin penalty, whereas down south or over in Wales, somebody gets done for undersized lobsters, they pay £40 fine. Here, they're dragged through a court system, and generally, we stay where we are, whereas the rest of the world moves on. I think that's probably, I think we shouldn't lose opportunity here, although I do acknowledge that it won't be the most popular thing going forward.
I'll leave that up to your invention and your imagination then to see what can be done, even at this primitive stage. Okay, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Now, I know you whilst we might not need you all, we are going to go through this other piece of business with regards to the item 10, which is the SR 2014/96, the Sea Fishing Financial Assistance to Fishing Boats Regulations. Before we move to approve this statute rule, we will take the opportunity to discuss how it is going with the officials. So, agenda item number 10, members, if I could push you over to that, which the memo is from the clerk at pages 152 and the papers from the department at 154. This was the emergency payments made to the fish industry to reflect the impact that the stormy weather had on the industry. Members were supportive of this when it was presented to us on the 4th of March 2014, and many MLAs obviously lobbied the Minister and applied pressure to the department for this. Can I ask the officials just to give us a quick update on the implementation of this financial assistance as we are here today?
Chairman, I'll speak to that. It's my unit has been looking after the administration of this. As you're aware, the scheme was made under the Financial Assistance Act, which required the Deputy Minister, or First Minister and Deputy First Minister to act jointly to make a designation. The scheme came into operation on the 26th of March. We wrote to the fishing industry on the 21st of March. We had anticipated that there would be around about 200 people who would be eligible for to apply for assistance, potentially. This was done on the basis of facts that were there in our system already. To qualify for this scheme, you had to have a Northern Ireland registered vessel. We keep the register. It had to be under 27 metres. Again, we know the length and all the details of the vessel, and you had to be active as a fisherman and fish for 50 days in the last fishing effort year, which ran from the 1st of February through to the 31st of January. We believe that there would be about 198 people that would apply to us. At the moment, we have made payments to 196 folk. We have 7 still to pay, but there were new creditors on our system and new people that came forward, and some of them were a little late, but there were provisions within the legislation to allow for that. Perhaps they were away, or there were some other circumstances that prevented them getting their application within a very short deadline, because we wrote to them on the 21st and we said to them, you need to have your application in by the 31st. Now, in effect, the nature of the application and the way we processed it meant that there was a minimal amount of information. In fact, we needed a signature and a few other things from them. Some of those people had never ever received a payment from the department before, because previous schemes were based on them being reimbursed for their landing dues and berthing charges, whereas this was on a fixed amount per vessel. So we expect that we had anticipated that we were going to have about 198 applicants, costing us £463,000, when in fact we will have 203 applicants who will be paying, costing us around about £475,000. So it wasn't, we were quite close in that. It's done and dusted. It will be done and dusted this week. The final payments will be made, Chairman, and we have had a number of queries raised with us. We wrote to people who, on the basis of our records, we thought would qualify, and we wrote to others and we told them, we don't think you qualify for the following reasons, usually because of their record of fishing activity. Now, we were able to consider the evidence that was, we had about 20 cases, in 6 cases we reviewed that evidence, and we decided, yes, there was a case for payment. And these were technical issues where, someone had sold a boat mid-season and had a track record of fishing on one boat, then a track record of fishing which continued on another boat. And there were some issues over administration and the proper recording of information, and we got those resolved. But for others, there was no further evidence provided to dispute our facts, or else they put in, there is an obligation for people to actually record information on an ongoing basis with us. And some people decided that they would bring records to us after they got the letter to demonstrate that they were active fishermen. It's a bit after the fact, and in those cases we had 4 rejections because people were coming in late in the day and saying that, I know that you only have a record of us fishing for 20 days, but actually we have another 50 days that we haven't told you about. Well, we need to approach this in a fair way, and I believe that we have done so. And I think that we have we've dealt with this one quite efficiently, and I'm very, very pleased with the team of people that I have working for me who have been able to process this very quickly, and indeed get the legislation prepared quickly to enable this to happen. So we're able to say now that the scheme is done, it's over, and we'll be making the final payments this week.
Was there others? I take it there was other similar schemes throughout GB and maybe even Republic with regards to the severe weather. Can you give us some comparisons as to?
There were. In Scotland, we had a scheme where they were looking at paying fishermen for losses of gear and equipment in 2013, and there were particular rules there about how people could demonstrate that in fact they have lost equipment. The response that my minister made was that in response to an assertion that people were losing money not because they had lost gear but because of the severe weather was hampering them from getting to sea, and they depended on their income for a share of the profits, and therefore were having difficulties with that. And they were telling her that people were depending on charitable handouts and accessing food banks and so forth. So that was the information that she took to the executive, and the First and Deputy First Minister accepted that there were circumstances that required to be mitigated. In the south, they have a gear replacement scheme as well, and in the southwest of England, which was severely hit by gales and fishing communities there would have lost fishing gear, they are providing a grant, providing a 40% contribution to the replacement of gear. But not new money. This is money that is coming out of the European Fisheries Fund and the scheme there. So this is a different kind of scheme that we have here. Again, those other schemes, then you would have to buy the gear. You'd have to replace the gear. You just couldn't use it. Oh, absolutely. Yes, you would have to do that. And clearly, if you are a fisherman and you've just lost your fishing gear, that's your livelihood, so you get a 40% contribution to that. But the scheme that's run under the EFF, you just simply can't replace like for like. You have to replace the gear with something which is more environmentally friendly or has a lesser impact on fishing. And that, I mean, for people who are working with static gears, that can simply be achieved by having things that allow small lobsters and crabs to escape from them, and biodegradable ends on fishing pots, so that if they are lost, they don't continue to ghost fish. So there are ways in which the environmental conditions can be met, but generally speaking, all of the other support mechanisms that we've seen are for the replacement of things that have been lost in storms, rather than income which have been lost because of people haven't been able to get to sea.
Is there no other way or no other funding that could be acquired from the EFF that DARD could have and haven't exploited, for want of a better word, for this type of issue or this type of scenario? No, generally speaking not. It's not the policy, European policy, to contribute to the operational costs or losses. I mean, you could argue in some respects that if people are experiencing hardship, there is a social security system there that is there to support them. And what we have done is we have made money available to the owners of fishing vessels, and have been asking them to make sure that they
pass that on as appropriate. Now, it's just not the case that because a vessel doesn't get fishing, that those individuals who work on that vessel don't get paid. There can be, different employers, different skippers approach this in different ways. Some may say, no, you're not getting any money. I haven't got any money. Others will spread that income throughout the year and give people a retainer, and they may get more whenever fishing is profitable. But what we did do was we did ask the question of applicants about how they were going to disperse this money, because an eligible beneficiary, according to the legislation, was a person who had been engaged in work or in connection with the fishing activities of a fishing vessel to which the financial assistance relates. So they had to be involved in that between October and February. The applicants were the owners of the vessels, and then it was a matter for them to decide whether or not what they did with it. But we asked them some questions when making the application, what they were going to do with it. Of the 458,000 or 9,000 that has been paid out so far, with another 15,000 to pay this week, 302,000 is going to be paid to the owners of the vessels. They're saying that they're taking this because, for whatever reason, they're paying bills. 60,000 will go to the skippers, and 95,000 has been paid to other crew members. And apparently £150 has been paid to others. There could be people who are keeping the books of a fishing vessel, for example. But generally, that reflects a circumstance where maybe the owners have felt that they have been carrying the strain on behalf of their crew. That's what they've told us. I can't speculate as to why that is the case. But certainly there was a desire to ensure that people who were the crew on vessels who weren't getting as much money were going to benefit. They did to some degree, but 20% of it has gone to them.
Okay. Any further questions on the Sea Fishing Financial Assistance to Fishing Boats regulations? If not, then I'll put the question that the Committee for Agricultural Development has considered SR 2014/96, the Sea Fishing Financial Assistance to Fishing Boats regulations, and has no objections to the rule. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Great, Dan. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time and your presentation and your answers today. Thank you very much. Okay, members, pushing on then. Agenda item number 8 then, if we go back. Reservoirs Bill, Clerk's memo on key issues on all the papers. Can I refer members to the papers received in connection with the Reservoirs Bill at pages 127? Of the pack. These will be placed on the website and included in the committee report. Can I also suggest that the 2 letters dealing with the Cregan Country Park from DRD and Derry City Council are passed to Cregan Country Park? Can I also ask members to note that the letter from NILGA at pages 145 of the pack refers to the draft information but not yet published report. Members are asked to keep this in confidence until the report is published. This section will be redacted before putting onto the committee website and in the committee report. And I also refer members to the tabled letter from Darragh, which deals with some of the issues that were discussed at the last meeting on the 8th of April. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 118? You will recall that at the meeting on the 8th of April we allocated question 2 members to ask the officials from Rivers Agency. We still have to cover, of course, grant aid, RPA, reservoir, the planning and local government, reservoir manager, insurance policy liability, worst case scenario, operating requirements, consultation and engagement with the private and third sector, and licensing regime, and also then the audit. So members, if you just indulge me 1 second just till I get me feet here. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Nearly forgot about you there. Forgive me. And again, we'll go through just exactly the same as we did the last session. Very, very similar in style and fashion. I'll start first with regards to the audit issue. Again, I know we covered this to a certain degree last time round, but some of the issues still outstanding from the 8th of April. Now, is it, with regards to the concerns that we did have the last time round, is there anything you want to add at this stage before we move off?
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for again the opportunity to come and discuss this with you. We have listened, we've attended all the evidence sessions, and we've certainly been thinking long and hard about some of the issues, in particular the need for an audit. And it was accepted the last time that it would be ideal to be in a position to know the condition of all reservoirs and to get to that point where we could then inform any further decisions. That's not in question. What really is in question in our minds is how we achieve that. One, within the policy framework that has been agreed by the executive, and two, that will then not shift the responsibility or will continue to confirm that responsibility with the reservoir manager, but in a way that actually facilitates those issues and actually getting the information. So last time I was here, I introduced the possibility of maybe having some sort of grant aid to at least commence the requirements of the bill, and we've had some further discussions about that and some further thoughts on that. So that would still be very much in our mind. I have to say that's still caveated by, I have to take that to the Minister. We have to seek approval for that through the department and then also from the Minister. But if that was a way to at least help with taking the bill forward, we would be certainly very keen to explore that, because it would at least put us in a much better informed position. Now, I think it does then lead on to the question about what you do with the subsequent elements of the bill, how you actually deal with that, whether you leave the bill as it sits at this minute in time. One issue that we have actually identified is that if you just introduce the bill as it is, and the requirement is just for an inspection may not necessarily give you the costs, because an inspection report doesn't necessarily have to give you that. All the inspecting engineer has to say, here are the defects. Now, it's the obvious thing for a reservoir manager or owner to say, well, also tell me the cost, but there's no requirement to have that in under the legislation. So we have one of two things in our mind. One is the possibility of adding a number of additional clauses that introduce a first inspection. And that first inspection not only allows a qualified reservoir inspector or engineer to look at the structure, but also then to quantify what the indicative cost would be. And that would then allow us then not just to have the reports with the condition, but actually the bit that we feel is missing, which is the cost element. And that would allow us then to be informed, either say, this is a big problem, or this is a relatively small problem, and would give us some idea how we could go forward. So we need to look at the clauses to see whether that's the way forward, or whether we just introduce using the provisions that are here at this minute in time. And we need to work through those with our drafters to see what's the best way forward. On the basis of that, we're happy enough if that is acceptable to the committee. We would take that away and seek to redraft some of the clauses and then offer those back to you then for your clause by clause consideration.
Okay, I think that would be welcome. I think it would give this committee much more with regards to quantum and quantity, and be able to measure the quantity of the problem. Yeah. So again, any other members want to raise or ask questions on this specific issue about an audit and about the initial inspection and about actually measuring the content and the actual quantum of the problem? Robin?
Chair, just if that's possible, to do that, is there any way then maybe we could delay the introduction of the further parts of the bill? You know, maybe a delaying clause or something along those lines. The rest of that legislation doesn't come into force or effect until that audit's completed.
If I refer you to clause 120 and to Part A,
Okay.
so on commencement, the sections mentioned there, 1, 2, 5, 6, 39, 88 to 92, etc. Those are the clauses that come in whenever the bill gains royal assent, and then a commencement order is required for the other provisions, and regulations are required for some. That would be another piece of work that we would undertake, just to see whether that list still remains valid under what we're saying, or whether you need to actually take some of those items out so that they don't come in at the point of royal assent, and what exactly would be within the commencement order, because we can stage the commencement order to do exactly what you've said, but it may well be useful to make that clearer, either within this or within the some of the documentation, just so that everybody was clear how we expect this to go forward.
There's a natural pause in the bill, and that clause brings in a natural pause, but perhaps that pause isn't constructed the way we would want it to be constructed now that we've considered the needs of the Art Committee, and we would look to do that and make sure that the main components were mentioned in that, so that whenever the bill comes in, those clauses can be enacted immediately.
Okay. Any other comments on this one issue of the audit and the discussion that Robin just had?
Well, really it ties into the same issue, the consultation and engagement with the private and third sector. I think it is fair to say, Chairman, that there has been a sense of feeling among some of the private owners and certainly the third sector owners that there wasn't consultation or sufficient consultation. Now, I think there's an open question about that, but given that there is a sense of grievance among those managers, be they in the private sector or in the third sector, I think it does make sense to in some way address that issue.
Yeah.
And I do welcome the comments that have been made in relation to maybe having some delays in relation to getting the overall strategy teed up. So I wonder can come into me and say what is the issue in relation to trying to seek a particular pot of money, carry out the audit benchmarking exercise that may be required.
The way this will be taken forward is, first of all, I need to take this back to the department and just seek approval through the department, and then we will put that as a recommendation to the Minister and put it in the context of the negotiations that we have had in terms of the scrutiny that's taken place. So we all know things are tight, that certainly the years to come in department terms, there isn't a lot of money, but what we're talking about here is a relatively modest sum, at least to start the process, because just to be clear, we're not talking about the construction works. All this is just the inspections, and if you base it on our figures that it costs us to get inspection reports done, we're talking about ours costs us £2,250 per inspection. So I think that's probably a reasonable enough figure. So if you're talking about a couple of grand per reservoir, we're not talking about millions of pounds here. We're talking about 100,000, 200,000, that sort of scale. So it's something that I'd be relatively comfortable with taking a bid to the Minister for.
Chairman, I welcome that statement. In relation to the fact that this exercise is largely EU driven in terms of meeting EU requirements and regulations, I would have thought that it's something that could have been applied for directly by the department to try and get a grant to cover the sufficient cost of the quantum of the initial benchmarking survey.
That's something that certainly we can explore. The other thing that I would suggest, because we've had some other thinking about what a grant scheme would actually look like, I think we also need to recognise that there have been some people out there that have been very conscientious and already have reports that we are going to recognise under this. And I would hate to be in a position where what we do is grant aid something that is very specific, and those people actually that have put their house in order miss out on getting that benefit. So what we're proposing is essentially a grant that would give initial assistance of a certain amount per reservoir, as opposed to a fee for a certain activity. And therefore, so if you don't have your initial inspection, it will cover that. But if you do have your initial inspection already done because you were conscientious, well then you may well be able to use it for some of the other requirements within a bill. For instance, employing maybe your supervising engineer, or for doing some other minor remedial works that are required, but it'll be the same amount of money. You can just use it in a slightly different way. What we don't want to do is just sort of penalise the conscientious out there that have actually have put their house in order.
Joe, you finished?
Yeah, well, Chairman, the only thing I would say is that there's a better chance of getting a comprehensive package, the entire initial audit of the entire infrastructure of impounded waterways or reservoirs. That I can see how a case can be made. Whereas when you get down to individual issues, individual reservoirs, then it's more complicated and cumbersome. Thanks, Chairman.
Yeah, and on that point, whilst we hear you say about a grant scheme offered to reservoir managers, owners, to do a piece of work that they would conduct, and I take your point about fairness and the fact that some may have already done this piece of work. If it was a department-led thing, in-house, where you could ask or require of the reservoir owners, if they have conducted this work initially, well, if they have, and it's assured, if you like, well, that then reduces the burden or the unfairness for them, because they've done that piece of work which you then will be able to use as part of the work you do.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that as well to see whether we can actually separate out those that already have an existing report.
Yes.
And see, the issue would be they've paid for that out of their own pocket.
Yes.
And so they may well view it as an unfair. If they had waited like some of the others, they would have actually got it funded and wouldn't have had to pay for that out of their own pocket. So it was more that situation that we didn't want to be penalised those that were actually conscientious. So whether it's a sum of money per reservoir to help with the initial implementation of the reservoir bill, knowing that for the vast majority that will be their first inspection, and the figure will be very similar, or the figure that we'll try and bid for will be very similar to a figure that we know will buy you the first inspection. But if you already have that inspection, I wouldn't like to have a situation where people say, so I did put my house in order, I was conscientious, I tried to abide by what a reasonable owner should do, but I'm getting no help, I had to fund that because it predated. Our other thought is to build on the point that Joe made about some of the private owners, to try and get them up to speed and engaged with this process that we're in, is we would try and encourage them by time-bound, by putting a time bound on the grant. So, for instance, and again, I'm just talking off the top of my head, money is available for 2 years after the bill is commenced. So at least that allows a period of time for us to get all the inspection reports, because we don't want to get into a position where we're 2 years in, we know 140 of them, and we can't get the last 11 done, and we don't know whether those 11 are not being done because they are big problems and would actually slew the grant, any potential for a capital grant scheme, or whether those aren't being done because there's no issue with them. So at least if we try and time bound it, that would at least give some people, the private owners in particular, encouragement to actually come on board and actually get this work done and move forward.
Okay. Robin Swan?
Are you moving on to general questions?
Yes, sorry.
No, sorry, just maybe going back, looking onto your term, that part 120 is actually the commencement in the section you mentioned there, David. Point 2 is the order provision. The Act comes into operation on such day or days as the Department may by order appoint. So that control would still rest very much with the department. There'd be no reference back to the committee or to the House.
And that's what we need to look at, because what we might do is some of the other provisions, change them from a commencement order to regulation.
Positive, right?
Yeah. And it depends on, because some of the other issues that we've talked about, and I think I'll leave it until we come on to maybe the operational requirements. We've had some thoughts on that we may well be able to change some of the wording from being so prescriptive to be by regulation. That would then give us the process of coming back to you and discussing that with you.
Moving on there, Alex, it ties in with one of the ones that comes into immediate effect under Royal Assent, and that's the definition of reservoir managers. And I think, well, you'll be aware of the committee's concerns as to who actually a reservoir manager should be or could be, and especially in regard to community and voluntary groups managing lakes or parts of lakes for recreational purposes. I think it was just really, Chair, I think the committee was keen that the reservoir manager should, the responsibility of a reservoir manager should actually rest with the reservoir owner, rather than somebody designated to do that. And I think that's been already admitted to or accepted by the DRD Minister for NI Water. No matter who's operating it, they would still be the reservoir manager.
Well, it's absolutely unquestionable. Northern Ireland Water are on record, both in DRD committee, or RD committee, and in this committee, that they said that they are the reservoir manager. If they lease it to somebody else, they remain the reservoir manager. They will not transfer that risk to somebody else. So there's no possibility of misunderstanding in that case. Where there is a possibility of misunderstanding is if you have a lease that is not clear. We have encouraged, we've mentioned this a couple of times, if you are in that situation as a community group, revisit your lease and make sure that it is clear where the responsibility is, because we can't write out to people within the legislation. What the legislation has done is it has defined who is the reservoir manager as opposed to who is not the reservoir manager. So if you are any of these, well then you are the reservoir manager, and the default, you're quite correct, is the owner.
We have taken legal advice on this previously, and the bill reflects the common law position. So the common law position is the person who controls or manages the reservoir is the person responsible. So the bill reflects that position. It wouldn't be the owner under common law. It would just be the owner that would be responsible. So the bill reflects what the common law position is, and that is that the person who is mainly responsible for looking after that reservoir will be regarded as a reservoir manager, not the owner.
Okay. Maybe we don't have the scenario. Have we reservoirs where there's multiple contracts or users on a reservoir?
Well, there are some that we have come across where there are multiple owners who own different bits of folios, and we've covered that in clauses 8 there, where there is a duty on multiple reservoir owners to cooperate, and they can appoint a single reservoir manager, and they can then apportion the responsibility, and that requirement is there. So it's not only that they are encouraged to, there's actually a duty on them, and that may well mean in certain cases that there has to be a conversation between the various managers where they sit down and agree, because the law requires them to. There's a duty on them to cooperate in a manner that ensures reservoir safety.
That could be quite complicated. You know, there could be farmers who have fields running down onto reservoirs, and there could be maybe 10 of them. Each one of those farmers or landowners would have a responsibility for the reservoir, and under the Act, what we are saying though is that they should get together and nominate one reservoir manager who would act on behalf of all of them. That wouldn't remove the responsibility from any individual, but they would act on behalf of all of them. And it would probably be the one who is responsible for the majority of the reservoir, and maybe particularly the impoundment of the reservoir.
Sorry, Robin. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm going to ask then, what about the competency of a reservoir manager then? Because if it is a co-op of owners and then one that gets designated, you can see the similar scenario where you have a fishing club where somebody is the best fisherman in the world, but they haven't a clue how to manage a reservoir. There's a competency issue there, and that's not going to prevent something happening.
No. And that's where the role of the supervising engineer is so important, because that person is competent. So they come along and they give you the day-to-day advice if required. And in their visits, so the way that relationship will develop is that they will start by calling out a couple of times, explain the risks associated with the reservoir, what you need to look for on the day-to-day basis. They'll set up the paperwork system for you. They'll set up maybe a water monitoring situation so that the person doesn't need to be competent, provided that they can then follow that instruction. Where the supervising engineer then isn't content that that competency or those works are done correctly, well then the supervising engineer will want to be assured that that is in place, either by offering that service or by further training to somebody else in order to carry out that role on behalf. But I know that sounds sort of very elaborate, training people in competency, but I need to stress these are fairly routine inspections that walk over, see if there's any change in the crest level, see if there's any wet spots have appeared that are different, make sure that the spillway remains clear, there's nothing blocking it, and maybe taking a dip of a water level and writing it down on a piece of paper and making sure that's recorded. We're talking relatively routine, rudimentary type functions, but they still need to be done. But the supervising engineer would expect that to be done and will work with the reservoir owner or manager to make sure that that's in place.
Yes, for times, right. So we'll have to just, adjourn, suspend.
Assembly, Committee Room 30.
Folks, we have 4, so we can activate and operate, but we can't just make decisions. Okay, with regards to, and again, sorry for the interruption, but we were on the reservoir managers. I know you were cut off, David, in mid-flow. I don't know if you can pick that up again. But I can't just remember.
Multiple reservoir managers.
I know that I had asked about the
competence
issue. I don't know, Robin, if you come in the back of that.
Don't remember.
I can't remember, but you were trying to reassure us that the supervising engineer and the inspections and working with the manager to bring them up to a certain capacity of training and engagement was going to be suffice.
Absolutely, and that's a very key role for the supervising engineer. I think we need to almost differentiate the role of an inspecting engineer and a supervising engineer. The inspecting engineer appears once every 10 years, does his duty on that day. That's the big inspection. The supervising engineer really, they almost treat the structures as if it's their own. And build up, as you heard the supervising engineer David McKellen here giving you evidence, building a relationship with the reservoir manager, and that relationship changes over time. As that reservoir manager would get more competent and more comfortable with carrying out duties, well then the supervising engineer actually has to do less and less, and that maybe is where they then can go down to the 2 inspections a year or potentially 1 inspection a year on the medium impact structures, and but they will not accept shoddy records. They will not be able to do their annual statement in the absence of any other evidence. So they will really ensure that the reservoir manager understands that role and train them up if needs be.
Rob, I know this is your issue here, so just chip in if you feel the need to at any time. When does it ever become when does the liability or the competence and the responsibility ever go on to the supervising engineer as opposed to the manager?
Yeah, well, in law it will be the reservoir manager who is responsible, and there are duties defined for the supervising engineer, and that is his role, and it is quite stringent because it says they are appointed at all times. Now that doesn't mean that they have to camp out on the structure, but it means that they have to be readily available at all times. And I can tell you that supervising engineers take that responsibility very, very seriously. For instance, if they are even on holiday for a fortnight, they will actually get somebody else to deputise into that role, because if an incident does happen, they have to be available at all times. That's what the 75 Act says in England, Scotland and Wales, and we have replicated that level of responsibility and that level of commitment within our bill here.
Okay. Robin, any other questions you have on?
No, I think that's...
Any other members on the Reservoir Manager? We are. And else you want to add just on Reservoirs Manager, you maybe want to tell us, you're keen to tell us but we haven't picked up on, or are you content?
I think on that area we're content with that one, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to bring in Tom on the operating requirements, if that's...
Yeah, can I ask you, why the department still so much struck on the fact that you need high-risk reservoir requires a minimum of 2 inspections, every year? Surely, if there's an inspection done and something's identified and that work's carried out, why then is there a need for 2 or more even inspections every year? At least 2 a year, if not more. I mean, we would feel obviously that one inspection would be ample in any 1 year, whenever it's already been inspected, work's been done, carried out to the standard required. And why do we need this inspection on a yearly basis, or 2 inspections at a minimum per year?
Okay. I'll explain the rationale of why we have it, and then I think there is a discussion to be had around this point, because obviously one issue that we're trying to ensure as we go through and scrutinise that this isn't a sledgehammer to crack the nut, and maybe this is one of the areas where we have a little bit of room for discussion. The rationale initially was under advice from the Institution of Civil Engineers and from the supervising engineers who said the best way, the optimum way of managing high impact structures is to see them in 2 different conditions during a year. So you could see them maybe during summer condition, whenever water would maybe be lower and the vegetation is high. But then you can also see it on the winter condition, where the water level would be high, but maybe the vegetation wouldn't be as great on the dam structure itself. So that's where we accepted that as evidence. We put that out to public consultation. And what we put out to public consultation was just, if you recall, just high and low. So through public consultation, we got a very clear voice that actually that on-off switch wasn't suitable. That there was a much strong feeling that should be high, medium, and low. So what we then wanted to do with the high and the medium was to make sure that there was a differentiation. So we stuck with the 2 for high, and then that's where we arrived at the 1 for low, and it really was just to make sure that there was some differentiation, just to be able to demonstrate that we were being proportionate in our approach. So that's the rationale, that's why it's in the face of the bill, but it's something that if there was a strong feeling among the committee that that's maybe too onerous a standard, we're quite happy to look at that. And the reason why we're quite happy to look at that is because this is just the minimum standard for structures which are in very poor condition. The supervising engineer may well recommend a slightly higher standard, and that's where the benefit of actually bringing your structure into good condition will be gained, because in a very poor condition structure that hasn't been looked at for many years, the supervising engineer might say, I want to see that structure every month until certain works are done. Whenever those works are delivered, well then we can go down to the minimum standard. And as I say, we have it at 2 at the minute. I'm happy enough for the discussion if we feel that that's too onerous. I have had the discussion with the institution just about how, if we could ease up on that slightly. One thing that I would say is that for the medium structures, they have stressed not to push it out too far, because they still need to have sort of that familiarity with the structure, that understanding of the structure. So pushing it out to something, for instance, like 1 and 5, they would feel that feel that there's a disconnect from the structure, and what that would result in is engineers not prepared to take that risk, not too prepared to expose their company to doing that work, and therefore that may actually, you might think that would actually have less inspections, and therefore that would be cheaper because of the additional risk that companies would associate with that. That actually may push the price up. So I'll maybe give it back to you, Chairman. If there's a feeling that that should be relooked at, we're happy enough to take that on board.
I think this, Tom, you maybe want to come in with another
Yeah,
question.
go ahead.
This is tied in with regards to even the risk designation and the fact that in most cases, all cases, the reservoir manager will not be able to do anything in his power to remove a high risk or medium risk just because of the population centre below. And that there is this degree of unfairness, but it is also the unfairness that whilst the onus is on him and the responsibility is on them, to keep their reservoir in this fit standard, the onus and responsibility is with them. The fact that when they carry out that work and they take that pain financially, it makes absolutely no difference to their label, their risk label, and then also with regards to the minimum standard.
Yeah.
So if you were to add rewards, not the right word, but if you were to add consequence into that, in the fact that, well, if you do this work, the burden becomes less. Now, whether that's in the label or whether that's in the burden of inspections, that's where you can make this a more fair system and less of a burden. And it also keeps the responsibility where it's at, and it also rewards responsibility and responsible reservoir managers.
Okay. There's two aspects of that I want to talk about. One is just the word risk, and I fully accept that somebody hearing that they live below a high risk structure may well make them uneasy. What we're not talking about is risk in terms of that it is at the point of failure. It is that balance between likelihood and probability and consequence that we're trying to communicate, and whether that we're better talking about high consequence reservoirs. Now, I know that some people could argue that we're just semantics and we're just playing with words, but it may well actually better communicate what we're trying to really put across to people. It's not that structure that people are living below is at the point of failure and therefore the risk is very high in comparison to the risk of crossing a busy road or the risk of flying on a plane or something like that. It's purely just because of the quantum of the impact that it would cause. So again, that's something that we have had some discussions about, and we'll maybe look at again to see whether that word is the right word going forward for our bill. The second aspect of it then is the sort of the reward aspect. The reward is getting from the enhanced inspection that the supervising engineer will require down to the minimum standard. And I'm not sure how we can put that in that is obvious within the bill, but whether the point that we actually get the reward in is actually by looking at that minimum standard and making sure the minimum standard is the absolute bare minimum that we will accept, that we are comfortable with, knowing that any structures which are in not great condition will not be getting that. They will have an enhanced inspection regime by the supervising engineer just because of the nature of the structure or just because of what's in the downstream area. And maybe that's the reward by actually easing up on that minimum standard.
Chair, just on the risk issue, for you have something named high risk, and there's work done to it and it's brought up to a standard and still called high risk. I'm just wondering, does that have any implications for someone who then's looking to take out, maybe they're running something under the doing and they're seeking to take out insurance to cover them? Does high risk then make it more difficult for to take out insurance on that compared to something that's low risk? And if you go to an insurance company and say, well, this is high risk, you know quite well what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's certainly something we can have a look at the word to see whether that will ease it up. Do you want me to answer the insurance point now? I know we'll have points that.
It was actually Michelle's, but Michelle's not. She's absent at the minute, so yes, it would lead on. Yeah.
So because I can't answer it again.
Just before, sorry, just to make people aware, it's clause 25K with regards to the visiting of the reservoir and the high risk reservoir being at least twice in every 12 months, and the medium risk reservoir at least once in every 12 months. That's where we're getting this from. 25K. Sorry, David. Go on.
Just on that, on 25K, are the committee's thoughts that should be reduced to once in 12 months? Because the other issue that we could have, or the other option that we have here, is not to be just quite so prescriptive, and actually to change that to an inspection regime will be introduced by regulation.
I'm not convinced that that one in every 12 months is not burdensome.
Yeah.
I still believe that may well be too frequent. Whenever we've had reservoirs that have been here for ever and a day, basically, whilst they're growing older, they're still here. And if you can compare other regimes and inspection regimes throughout the living world, it's maybe just not, it seems to be just too burdensome. But then again, if you leave it more flexible, then how do you regulate it? How do you regulate that so that you don't get this by default anyway?
Yeah, that's the issue.
And then that might mean then more of a robust appeals mechanism.
Yeah.
You know, or a more stringent appeals mechanism.
Well, maybe the thing to do is to leave that with us. We'll have a look at that and come back with then an alternative on that one, as a suggestion, with a bit of rationale behind it rather than just sort of what our gut feeling is. That's acceptable.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, Tom was adding then about the insurance and public liability issue.
Again, there's two different aspects that I want to deal with on insurance. The first one is the insurance of properties downstream, and then the second issue is the insurance of the reservoir itself, because we need to be very clear they are two completely different insurance issues. I've spoken to the Association of British Insurers, and they have said that a property downstream of a reservoir is insured by its, or will be covered by its property insurance. In the event of a failure, that would be a reasonable thing to be covered by property insurance. And they would not inflate house prices that are below reservoirs because they are comfortable enough, they understand the risk. Now, they are, however, concerned that they're not regulated in Northern Ireland, but we're dealing with that. We're going through this process. We will get a bill, we will get regulation, and I think I don't feel it, or I don't get any sense that there's within the committee or within even the reservoir managers that people don't recognise that something needs to be done. So I think we will get something, and so that brought some comfort to the ABI that they know that we are bringing forward a reservoir bill and are going to regulate our structure. So individual household insurance won't be influenced by structures whenever we get the bill in place. The second issue that I said was about the liability insurance. My understanding is that it is virtually impossible to get liability insurance for dam breach, that is not an insurable. You just couldn't afford the liability associated with that. So I would caution anybody that believes they have it, I would encourage them to go and check that is the case. They certainly do not have it if they have not declared that they have got a reservoir on their property. You know, it's not a standard component of any business insurance or any property insurance. The liability associated with that will not be covered. So anybody that thinks that they are insured would need to have a discussion with their insurance company. And the first thing that they will ask, because we have some examples of that even here, the first thing that they will ask is, have you got a supervising engineer and have you got an inspection engineer, and when was the last time an expert looked at it? Because that's exactly what I think it was Antrim Angling Club, in some of the discussions that we had in one of the stakeholder groups, that they offered that they, in order to get third-party liability insurance on the paths around the structure, they had to have an inspection report to show that they were managing the structure in a reasonable condition. Now, that wasn't to get insurance for the dam breach, that was just to get third-party liability insurance on the paths around the reservoir, that they had to show that they were managing their structure in a reasonable way. So I would encourage people, if they think that they are insured, I think that people need to go and have a discussion with their insurance company to make sure that it is covered. If they assume it's covered in a household policy or a business policy without declaring it, I would really be cautious that the liability associated with a dam breach will not just be part of a normal household insurance or business insurance.
I understand. Any other questions on that, Tom?
I think that's very clear. It covers the issue on insurance.
Okay. Joanne, you want to touch on the worst case scenario?
Yes, Chair. Could we have a look at clause 69? I think I would suggest consideration be given to soften and to allow a wider discretion as to whether DARD will go for full cost recovery or not. It just seems to me like a common sense approach is needed rather than it's very heavy-handed at the minute. And have you considered the aspect of this at all?
Again, this is another area that we've picked up ourselves from some of the discussions that you've had and some of the evidence that you've taken from some of the other people, that this particular point 6 is very black and white, and it's that term, the amount of any costs, because I think that means that we would have to, on a job code and everything that was associated with that, we would then be duty bound to recover that. And clearly, if there was no prospect of cost recovery, the department needs to take a decision. It can't just go after money that it has no prospect
Just
to
thinking
do.
the scenario of maybe an elderly person that has no way, no means, maybe the mental anguish or whatever, you could put that person through when there's no way of recovering it. No common sense should, I would imagine, come into play in it.
Now, what we will still keep quite strong is that first part of that sentence, or that clause. So there will still be a duty on the reservoir manager that they must pay, but maybe it is something along the lines of if requested or if deemed appropriate, or so there has to be some discretion there. But if it is requested, if we think that it is reasonable to recover the costs, well then I think the bill does need to still have it that they must pay, so that we don't just give a loophole. People just say, I'm quite able to pay, but I'm actually just going to give you the runaround, and that we have no powers within.
How do you find then, David, a form of words around that you're not putting?
Yeah, what we will have to do is take that particular clause and that particular issue back to the drafters.
Okay.
And so again, that will be another clause that we will present you with an alternative. Yeah.
There is, right. There is actually, when we were looking at this, there's a form of words in the next page, 44, bottom of page 44, 71.7. If the department considers it appropriate to do so, it may serve notice of arrangement, may require the manager to pay the department such an amount as the cost reasonably incurred. So there's already a form of words in a clause. It's slightly it's not as black and white as the one that you've just quoted.
So it could be incorporated within clause 69?
Yes, words to that effect. We're not sure whether we need to actually go to another form of words that will change that one and the others to make it the way that David had suggested. But we're working with our drafter on that currently.
Certainly, if that was incorporated, I think it would go some way to alleviate, the concerns that they're going to pursue me to the bitter end, whether they have money or not.
Yeah.
So that, I think that would be. If you could ask another point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, under the heading worst case scenario, I've asked you this before about my concerns and concerns I've heard about over engineering. I know you've answered that before, David. How do we get round that, the concerns that have been raised with me over recommendations being over-engineered and prohibitive expenses that people fear that they're going to incur? Would you be concerned about the potential effect that this fear of the worst case scenario, that they're going to have this excessive cost that there's no way they're going to deal with? How do you alleviate that fear? How do you set in the bill that the concerns about over-engineering? How do you have any proposals for that?
Again, I'm not sure how if we can necessarily answer it on the face of the bill, but what I can say is that there are a number of appeal mechanisms there, that if a reservoir manager feels that what has been recommended, that within the bill they can do, take an appeal and get another person's opinion. In addition to that, the professional conduct within the institution is very, very stringent.
Reputation?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is a mechanism there that if somebody is mistreating a client or not being professional in the way that they're dealing with, or not being upfront about costs, or charging something different than was actually agreed, well then there are professional conduct committees which do have sanction against professional members.
Just don't want reservoir owners to feel their hands are tied completely.
Yeah.
They're at the mercy. If they feel it's going to be over-engineered, come what may, they're going to have to pay these costs. And
Yeah.
if nowhere to turn, I think there needs to be somewhere built in that they feel, well, that's an angle we can go at, or, you know, just to, again, keep the pressure off that they're not going to be face a successive bill,
Yeah.
and their eyes say it has been over-engineered because of their, you know, they've no choice in the matter.
Right. And certainly the dispute mechanism within the bill is probably the first way of dealing with that, and then you have the profession as well. I think what we've also discussed the last time was whether we could actually have some sort of oversight rule in terms of
I think that would
costs.
probably be more reassuring
Yeah.
if there was that oversight role, that they don't feel they're on their own. And, you know, this is just what has been, you know, said to me. They're from what may, they're going to have to pay. They've no choice. If they feel it's been over-engineered, they've nowhere to turn. Or who's protecting them
Yeah.
from that? So you foresee an oversight role then for yourselves?
Certainly, on the last time we were here, we said that we would have a look at that and see whether we can actually fit that in. Again, just to stress that it's not so that it becomes a regulated activity. It's just maybe on an annual statement that we would put out a range of costs that we've seen. For instance, supervision costs or inspection report costs, so that at least then somebody could go and look where they fit on that range, and that would either give them comfort that they are paying roughly what other people are paying, or whether they're one of the outliers, and then that would at least alert them to ask the question why.
Have those guidelines.
There may well be a reason why, because your structure is particularly complex or in particularly poor order, or because you as a reservoir manager did nothing or chose to do nothing or felt that you couldn't do anything and you needed more assistance. But at least it would flag out those outliers, and it would allow an individual to ask the question. So again, that's something that we're committed to, and we're quite happy to keep that commitment. We'll look at that for you.
Finally then, what do you foresee the means of redress if the owners feel the recommendations provided by the engineers are too excessive? How are they going to know where to turn or where to go, or, you know, with that guidance, how they appeal it, or where they turn to if they think?
Well, that's covered in clause 57.
Page 37.
That's enshrined with it anyway. That they do.
So that's referral to a referee in 57, and then requirements in terms of preliminary certificate, also then the commissioning of a referee in 59.
What would happen in practice is if a reservoir manager felt that there was over-engineering, to use that term, they could agree with the reservoir manager to have another reservoir manager or reservoir engineer to have a look at the reservoir. If they wanted a completely independent person to appoint, then the Institution of Civil Engineers could do that for them.
That would be an additional cost then to the manager to get a second report then, would it? Or?
Yes, it would.
Right.
It would.
So they have that, I suppose, sphere that they're going to have to pay again for another report?
Yes, there is that risk that they take.
Right. There's going to be nowhere then, if they do feel they're over-engineered, because you had spoke, David, about guidelines, you know, within the upper and lower limits of the prices. Is there going to be anywhere where you could step in and maybe say, no, this is all at their own?
Yeah.
We can have an oversight, because it's not a regulated activity. We will be able to have an oversight role. We'll be able to give an indication of costs, but if they're outliers from that, well then we wouldn't be able to cap costs or cap fees. It would just be an indication to somebody that's tendering for this work or asking for a price whether they've got a fair deal or not. I'm not sure how we can go further from that.
No, I'm just
How could
concerned
actually-
if the field it's been over-engineered, then they're going to have to bear the expense again of another report.
That's a problem.
Well, certainly, whilst there's additional cost in this institution, if it felt that a particular manager had a problem with a particular engineer, then there would be a discussion that could take place with the institution about whether there is malpractice here. I know would be at no cost, at least to have that initial discussion, and that may well allow the fears to be dismissed, and the assurance given, and that may well be a step that an individual would like to take before they actually go down the formal appointment of a referee, because I suppose you also have to recognise that getting a very high price for some work, most reservoir managers won't know really. They'll know that it's expensive, but they won't know whether it's high or low because they're not an engineer.
Hence the fears that like hearing about over-engineering.
We do accept that. So there may well be a process that they don't have a high price, they've got the right price, it's just a big figure, and there's an element of
it's not necessarily all up at the cost of the report or the cost of the work. Does it sit neater in clause 106?
I was going to come to that.
Assessment of engineer's report.
Yeah, going to come to that, yeah.
The department may by regulation make provision for the assessment of the quality of reports, written statements and certificates given under this Act by the various engineers. Is it?
And what we were really getting at is that there's a minimum standard that's required. It has to say certain things, it has to be in a certain format, and it has to have certain pieces of information, and that allows us then, if it's not in that format, and the way that works in GB at the minute is that there's a guidelines. In fact, if you read all the 10-year reports, they all look very, very similar. They all have the same contents page, and they all follow the same structure because the EA has produced templates. This is the way we want them. So that this power is really just to say they're not coming in the way we'd like to see them.
So it's just the form of the...
It's the form more than necessarily the content. Again, I know of one case in England where exactly what you're describing took place and another engineer had to be brought in, but I only know of one.
Okay.
And that's 2,200 reservoirs.
But is that fear of the owners or managers think that they're going to be the one, or it's going to happen to them? That's it's taken away.
But it is only that one that I know of. Since the regulations that I'm aware of, that somebody actually was going over and above what they should have been required to do, and another engineer came in that case and was critical of the reports, and actually they were then removed, and somebody else then completed the reports. So whilst it is a possibility, it is very, very rare, because you've seen the guys that are here, they do view themselves as at the top of the profession and very, very conscientious.
I understand, but it certainly is a fear out there. Getting past that for reassurance that there's going to be some comeback or clarify that they're not going to be over-engineered. But okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay, Ian Milne.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks. I want to cover the aspect of grants. I know it's been covered fairly extensively, at the start of our discussion. But just to be clear, when we're talking about grants here, is it grants that is foreseen to be just covering the private and the third sector parties?
Yeah. Well, the grants
exclusively.
Well, the grants at this moment in time, or the clause doesn't specify who. So we have to do that by regulation.
Okay.
So within the regulation, we would set out exactly who would be eligible and equally who then is not.
Yeah. So
the commitment at the minute in time that the Minister made through the second stage debate, she said that she was particularly interested in looking at the third sector, not-for-profit organisations, but that was in response to issues that were brought to the floor of the House. She wasn't saying that those are the only ones that she was interested in. She was responding to the comments that were made, and they were predominantly about third sector and not-for-profit organisations, so that's why she responded in that way. So it will not be necessarily restricted to that. We need to, first of all, establish that we can actually take out a grant scheme, establish then that baseline, that audit, and then see what the larger capital grant is required, and then determine at that stage who should actually be eligible and who actually can get money elsewhere.
And that audit there is it's done on all of the reservoirs.
Well, that's what we're proposing to do, is that we will have a scheme that will require owners to carry out their first inspection, but it's a first inspection plus, because we need the cost component to that as well, so that at least we can sit with a suite of 151 reports and can come up with a figure of what it will take to bring structures up to standard. And then at that stage, at least we're better informed to make a business case for either a capital grant scheme, or we might actually have enough evidence to satisfy ourselves that actually this isn't an issue, and that we're talking about relatively small sums of money, and that private owners and companies out there should have this burden. We'll have to wait and see what size of figure we actually end up coming up
so
with.
that there's the initial inspection that we're talking about at this stage.
So we're really focused on the initial inspection, and I would be proposing not to restrict that we need 151 reports, and
before we see where we're at.
I don't believe that I need 151 times whatever figure I can bid for, because I know Northern Ireland Water structures are already inspected, and the figures we're talking about are small in comparison to their overall budget. Our own structures are already inspected, so we don't need any assistance, and again it's small in comparison to our overall budget. There's a number of district councils that you've heard from, including Belfast, already have these done.
Roughly 50,
I think we're really focused down onto those, that smaller number. I think it is 50-ish structures that need some assistance to get that first inspection done.
And again, and a very good point in it, that it shouldn't just be not-for-profit organisations. There is a lot of private sector, private individuals who do not make a profit out of the reservoir. If you know what I mean, so it's financial gain to them. They would need to be certainly a part of it too.
Well, I've certainly have no issue saying that initial tranche of inspections, that initial assistance, it'll cost us more to work out who should get it than actually administering the scheme. So I have no issue with that, and I may well have an issue whenever it comes to giving out large capital grants to commercial companies, but that's a debate for another day. I don't think we need to get into that. But first of all, we need to have the figures to understand whether that's a real situation and one that we'll have to find a way around, or whether actually they're in reasonably good condition. What they need is a bit of tidying up and a bit of minor works, as opposed to some of the major capital works that we think may well be required.
Okay. Just another point then to cover is the. Are you content? Are you really sure on the justification then for a bill as opposed to the two other ways, or in the explanatory notes? You talk about the reservoir licensing scheme, and then option one was, of course, do nothing, self-regulate. With regards to that, and in regards to why could you not have used a licensing regime, or indeed the existing legislation that's in there with regards to Article 33 of the Drainage Order 73 and the Article 297 of the Water and Sewage Services Order 2006?
First of all, I'll deal with the options considered, and then I'll deal with the other legislation as two separate answers. I'm absolutely convinced that the panel engineer system is the right system, and that means that independent advice is given to the reservoir manager, as opposed to centralising that and then charging on for that service. I think that the panel engineer system will be a more cost-effective system for individual managers than government trying to do this and then just charging for a licence system. So I'm absolutely comfortable with that. As was the responses to the public consultation. So question 4 that we asked, are you content that option 3, the panel engineer system, would be the preferred implementation option? 11 were content, so this is out of 13 responses that we're talking here. 11 were content, and the other 2 were content provided that assistance was required. So that means that every single response that we got through the public consultation was positive, that this was the appropriate system out of the options that we considered. I'm also absolutely and utterly convinced that the self-regulation system does not work. We have evidence of inspection reports that we know have been done and no work subsequently carried out. We know of other examples where there are obvious defects that are not being addressed, and government needs to do something to make sure, to give assurance that these reservoirs are in good condition. So I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that self-regulation should not be considered as a realistic option, and that therefore then that a new piece of legislation is required. To go on then to, is a bill required as opposed to bolting it on the drainage order or bolting it onto the water and sewage services order? The drainage order only deals with the arrest of injury to land, and it only enables us to require the opening of sluices or valves. So it's really to draw down water in order to stop harm to land, and so there's no requirement in that for any inspection or any improvement works. All you have to do, as soon as you stop injuring land, in essence, the drainage order is satisfied. And therefore it is very, very specific. The second thing about that, it can't be used on government departments, harbours, and there's a list of other bodies, public sector bodies, that we can't serve a notice on. So again, it dismisses that as not a realistic option. The second one really was a realistic option. That's the water and sewage services order, that we could have brought in regulation for the construction, repair and maintenance of dams and reservoirs. However, whenever we got some legal advice on that, they thought that the thrust of the overall bill was the supply of public water and sewage services, and that whilst we could have brought regulation for the safety of reservoirs through that, it could have been challenged. That the thrust of the legislation was public water supply, not private dams, and in the face of that challenge may well have destabilised the regulations that we brought in. And so the advice was, look, it's easier just to go for a blank sheet of paper, go take forward a reservoir bill that was clean and tidy, had all the legislation within one document, and could then be subjected to the scrutiny as we have today.
Okay. I'm happy enough with that. The other issue, the other outstanding issue, is the RPA and planning and local government issue. Oliver, do you want to come in on this?
No.
Right, okay. Are you convinced that given RPA and the role of planning now within local government, are you convinced that there's no place in this bill that council have to be involved, either as a side-by-side with Rivers Agency or enforcement agency within planning service to actually create and prevent something from happening? Yeah. How do you see RPA and councils then after RPA setting with regards to this bill?
Yeah, well, I don't see that there's a requirement on the face of the bill, and the reason why I don't see it in the face of the bill is because I believe that it is adequately covered in the new draft PPS 15. So the new draft PPS 15, probably the most significant change between the current PPS 15 and the new draft PPS 15 is the old policy had 4 or it had 4 policy areas. The new one has 5, so it has an FLD 5. And FLD 5 is specifically about development in the proximity to reservoirs. So I feel that it is very adequately covered under the new version of PPS 15, which is just finished our public consultation, and they're going through the consultation responses at the minute. But we expect that it will be confirmed with maybe some slight tweaks to it. But we're expecting it to be confirmed, okay?
And will FLD 5, will that bring with that a complete blanket ban or a moratorium on development downstream within, say, inundation maps?
It absolutely won't, and the reason why it won't is because it is perfectly safe to live below a reservoir provided somebody looks after the reservoir, provided that an engineer looks at the reservoir a couple of times a year, provided that some rudimentary evidence is kept of water levels, that you can check whether there's leakage, provided that somebody keeps an eye that it's not moving, and provided that every 10 years an inspection engineer comes in and carries out their role. It is perfectly safe to live below a reservoir. So we were very conscious that whenever we were working with planning on the new policy, that we made that point, that we were making sure that the development was not stopped below reservoirs. Now, that's not to say that all development is appropriate, because you do have to recognise that there is still a risk that you could get a failure, and therefore FLD 5 deals with that, where it actually stops or questions that there will be a presumption against development within the potential flood inundation area for proposals that include, and there are 3 of them, essential infrastructure, storage of hazardous substances, and bespoke accommodation for vulnerable groups. So what we're trying to do is say it's perfectly safe to live there, perfectly safe to carry on your workplace, but maybe there's some things, if you can find somewhere else to do it, that might be a better place to do it. So if there's essential infrastructure, storage of hazardous substances, or bespoke accommodation for vulnerable groups, maybe you want to think about putting those somewhere else, and then at least you don't have that problem of how do you evacuate those in the event of a failure. And it's a presumption against, so it's not an absolute ban. If there is no other viable alternative, and as part of the flood risk assessment, a road, for instance, has to go below a reservoir. This does not block it entirely, but at least it poses the question. Justification will have to be provided at the planning stage why it has to be there and why that road can't be somewhere else.
With regards to the fact that development can change the status of a reservoir up to high risk, and with that there is this unfairness, which I see it because the reservoir manager has done nothing different, but will now then have a different level of burden depending on how this bill travels through its passage. Is there anything that can be done within the bill, or indeed FLD 5, to bring some sort of assurance to the reservoir owner? Now, I know there is a bit where a developer has to provide assurance regarding reservoir safety, but it's not really in his gift to provide reservoir safety. Yeah. How does that work?
Well, we see it working very similar to if you have a requirement for a sightline that goes on to third-party land. If you want your development, you need to go and deal with that person that owns that third-party land and come up with some sort of arrangement in order to secure that land, in order to achieve your sightline. Well, in essence, and being very simplistic, this is no different. If you want to develop downstream of a reservoir and you want planning approval, well then you, as a developer, need to go and work with whoever it is that owns that and agree whatever works are needed in order to satisfy the planning condition. So we see it not dissimilar to the way planning works and the planning conditions work today. Now, I suspect that there'll be some difficult situations out there where a reservoir manager doesn't want development downstream, But in essence, that's no different than somebody that owns a field and doesn't want development beside them and therefore won't sell the ground for the sight line. You know, that's no different to that situation, because we're dealing with third-party land and you can't be compelled to give up your property.
Yes and no, in the fact that the reservoir manager may not own the land to be developed, and he's basically then, if the reservoir manager sees that he's maybe one development away from going from medium to high risk, they'll just then put a blanket ban on everybody and every developer that comes near him. But then that hurts, and there's an unfairness then flipped over in that the person who owns the land who wishes to develop it downstream won't be able to, because he'll go from medium to high by fault of that development.
Well, you're absolutely right, and there are sites, and if we take it away from reservoirs, there are sites and pieces of fields in towns that are not developed, not because of reservoirs, but because they can't get agreement with neighbours, and so it's really no different than that. If you can't come to an agreement, and you know that the cost associated with this then needs to be factored in, and if we can't assure people that they are living below a safe reservoir, well then not developing might actually be the right thing to do. And whilst it's painful for that individual who had hope value, that may well be the right thing to do for the greater good, not to allow that development to proceed in an unsafe manner.
Can you see, and I know it's not in your gift and it's nothing to do with Rivers Agency to that degree, because it's a two-party, private party agreement, but can you envisage then that the developer will go to the reservoir manager and say, well look, I'll pay for your additional inspection every year. If it stays, you know, we will accrue that burden for you, and we'll pay for that because it's given us our planning application, and it's giving us also an assurance that you are going up to standard.
Oh, absolutely, and that would be, I could see that the reservoir owner is in a relatively good negotiating position, particularly in that case, and not just from the low to the medium, also the medium to the high. Now, although the burden is slightly different, there is an additional burden there as well. So all that does is strengthen the negotiating position of the reservoir manager to make sure that they don't get caught with a burden unnecessarily, that it does rightly sit with the developer, who then can factor that in and say, well, I've £100,000 worth of work to do that, plus of this longer term burden, does that make this site viable and attractive, or do I walk away and actually develop somewhere else?
Okay, I have no further questions, members. This is basically our last chance before we go into an informal clause by clause assessment of the bill. Are any other members got any questions for David and Kieran here when they're there? I know we've covered all the main topics over the last two periods, but if there's something additional you want to ask or you're not too sure of, this is the time to ask it, certainly. Okay, David, Kieran, is there anything else you need from, you want to ask us or
there's only
say?
one, and I don't want to extend everybody's time, sorry, but one piece of clarification that I felt is worthwhile, that somebody had mentioned that Scotland has no regulation and they are bringing in the Scottish Reservoir Bill and that will introduce regulation. That is slightly incorrect. The Reservoir Act 1975 covers England, Scotland and Wales, so their structures have been regulated since 1930. What is happening with the new Scottish legislation is it removes that piece of GB-wide legislation and puts in a bespoke Scottish piece of legislation, and it's that has not been commenced. So their structures are regulated today. All that's happening is that the responsible reservoir authority is going to change, and they're also going to have high, medium and low and 10,000 cubic metres. In fact, their bill is very, very similar to what we're scrutinising here. But their structures are regulated today, and just thought that clarification was useful.
Okay, Robin?
Chair, I suppose it's just a briefing, it hasn't been covered anywhere else. It's just, I know some of the private reservoir owners are feeling a bit of stress and strain under the fear of what may come. As a department, are you working with any other agencies for support and guidance on how you deal with those individuals? I'm thinking rural support or something along those lines, especially in the individual cases of private ownership of the reservoirs.
Ulster Farmers Union even, because they correspond to us.
Yeah. we're not working with anybody that I can think of specifically, but we are happy to work with other groups if that would.
Yeah, and just so you know, as you go further down the line, and both people begin to get worried, if we start to go through clause by clause, and there may be need for maybe even your own department to be aware, because I know some of the DARD inspectors, frontline officers work with their own support and get training through them as well.
Yeah.
The idea is that by signs of stress or pain or...
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good suggestion.
Okay, any other comments then, members? Okay, listen, David and Kieran, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
I'm sure it's been time spent wisely for both the committee and for yourselves. Again, a very important piece of work, something we've taken very seriously. So, again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Yep. Thank you.
And next week we go into the informal clause by clause. I know that there'll be a piece of work for you to do beforehand, so we'll certainly let you get on with that over the next few days. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, members, then, we haven't much to go. Thank you very much for your patience. Agenda item number 11 then is correspondence. And the suggested, the recommended suggestions on page 166. Can I draw your attention to the request at page 217 from Mid Antrim Animal Sanctuary for a meeting? Are members content that an informal meeting be organised for a Monday or a Tuesday? Now, I am going to suggest maybe the 20th of May meeting. If we have a meeting, that is the week of the elections. It is the Tuesday. I'm not sure yet whether plenary will take place on the Tuesday. There was talk, I think, that one day for plenary that week.
That's correct.
Right, okay. That would be the Monday as opposed to Tuesday?
Monday.
Monday, so if that's, is that...
It was put through the business committee
today. Right, so we won't be here on the Tuesday. So I will not be suggesting...
No meeting on
suggesting
Tuesday?
20th,
Okay.
20th of May for a meeting then.
Unless the executive calls something for us, but...
Unless they call, you never know. They've done it before. Are members content then that we don't meet? I know we're going to go to the Forward Work programme, but just maybe that we don't meet on the 20th of May, because we're not going to be here anyway for plenary. Okay. Are members then content with the suggested actions on page 166 with regards to correspondence?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay. And then that brings us on then to the Forward Work programme, agenda item number 11. I can refer members to the Forward Work programme at page 219 of the pack. Can I ask members to note that the work programme reflects discussions that the committee had on the 8th of April. Can I ask members to put the following dates into their diary? Thursday the 15th of May will be the DARD breakfast at Balmoral, followed by the free time to browse the various stands, exhibitions and competitions. Can I ask members to note that a tick sheet regarding the DARD breakfast at the Balmoral show was, I think it was everybody got it. Did anybody not get it? I don't know if I got it. But it's there.
I'll put you down for the full fry.
Put me down for everything. Just everything. And then the afternoon of the Thursday, the 5th of June, will be a committee visit to the reservoirs at Cregan Country Park. A tick sheet is being, maybe that has been sent round to...
No, it's going to go now, yeah.
That'll go round now then, if that would be okay. Tick sheet is being sent round to ascertain members who will be attending, and if a bus is necessary, or if members want to make their own way to that.
Belfast?
Correct. No, Derry.
Derry. The people were here to give a presentation. Can I also ask members to note that the committee... No, that's certainly done. Right, okay, I'm not going to go...
No committee meeting on the 20th.
For fear of somebody saying we want a meeting now.
Yeah. Might be here, I might not.
Can I also ask members to note the question time for the DARD Minister will fall? That's now changed. If it's going to be on Tuesday 20th of May, that would have been
Monday.
Being brought forward to the Monday. Okay, and then Tuesday the 17th of June also. The committee then schedule for these dates. For those dates will be adjusted as necessary. Any other business then, members? Agenda item number 12. No further business. No. Agenda item number 13 then is date of the next meeting, which will be Tuesday the 6th of May at 1:30 p.m. in room 30 Parliament Buildings. Okay, declare the meeting adjourned. Okay, thank you.